quorum. I ask the clerk to call the roll of members.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan is here. Mr. Isa. Mr. Buck. Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates is here. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana is here. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs is here. Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock is here. Mr. Tiffany. Mr. Massey. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop is here. Ms. Sparts. Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald is here. Mr. Benz. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein is here. Mr. Gooden. Mr. Gooden is here. Mr. Vandrew. Mr. Vandrew is here. Mr. Nels. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore is here. Mr. Kiley. Mr. Kiley is here. Ms. Hageman. Ms. Hageman is here. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran is here. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee is here. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hunt is here. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry is here. Mr. Nadler. Mr. Nadler is here. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Present.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia is present. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Cicilline.
Present.
Mr. Cicilline is present. Mr. Swallow. Mr. Swallow is here. Mr. Liu. Mr. Liu is here. Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Jayapal is here. Mr. Correa. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon is here. Mr. Neguse. Ms. McBath. Ms. McBath is present. Ms. Dean. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Escobar is present. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross is present. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy is here.
Are there any other members present who have not been recorded? Gentleman from California, Mr. Isa.
Mr. Isa is present.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to note that Representative Cohen is unable to attend today because he is attending the funeral of Tyree Nichols in Memphis.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other members present who have not been recorded?
Mr. Schiff is present.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Mr. Buck is present.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 31 members present.
A quorum is present. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure and distinct honor to introduce to the committee Staff Sergeant Corey Ryan Beekman, an American hero and a constituent of mine residing in Pensacola, Florida. Staff Sergeant Beekman was born in Holland, Michigan. He enlisted in the Michigan Army National Guard while serving as a senior in high school. During his time as a sophomore at Northwood University in 2006, Staff Sergeant Beekman volunteered for deployment to Iraq in place of a fellow soldier, where he served for over 15 months. Upon redeployment, he graduated with degrees in hospitality and business administration. In October 2011, Staff Sergeant Beekman deployed to Afghanistan with his National Guard unit for 13 months. In 2016, he was once again activated as station commander during the response to the Flint water crisis, and in recognition of his role was awarded the Michigan Legion of Merit and Distinguished Service Medal by the state of Michigan. After sustaining injuries in combat, Staff Sergeant Beekman retired in 2019 after 16 years of combined service to this nation, and he moved to Florida to be with his family. He currently sits on the Escambia River Gun Club's Board of Directors as their public relations chair. As a constituent of Florida's 1st Congressional District and a recipient of the Purple Heart, the Combat Action Badge, the Afghanistan and Iraq Campaign Medals with Campaign Stars, 2 Army Commendation Medals, and 2 Army Achievement Medals, as well as numerous other personal unit decorations. It is my honor to introduce Staff Sergeant Beekman to the committee, and I request that he be permitted to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Without objection.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, and we want to thank Mr. Beekman as well for his service to our country. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for opening comments that he may have and to introduce new members from his side of the dais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to congratulate you on becoming chairman of this committee. It's been the great honor of my life to serve as chairman for the past 4 years, and I'm very proud of what we have accomplished as a committee. In the last Congress alone, we passed 110 bills through the House, and 53 of our bills were signed into law. Under Democratic leadership, we enshrined marriage equality in federal law. We enacted the first significant gun safety legislation in a generation. We ensured that survivors of sexual assault and sexual harassment are free to tell their stories and to seek justice in the federal courts. We reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. We codified lynching as a crime in federal law. We addressed the spate of hate crimes against Asian Americans and others in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we enacted measures to strengthen the antitrust system. On the House floor, we advanced key civil rights legislation to restore and strengthen the Voting Rights Act, to provide comprehensive protections for LGBTQ Americans, to reform our marijuana laws, and to provide for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. We passed several bills to enhance public safety and reduce crime, while also passing legislation to ensure that law enforcement is held accountable. We passed several bills to strengthen our immigration system, including legislation to protect Dreamers, and we worked to provide transparency and accountability in our federal courts. We also supported President Biden's efforts to restore the rule of law and rebuild the Department of Justice to protect the rights of the American people rather than the whims of the president, while continuing to exercise meaningful oversight over the executive branch. Although I recognize that the new Republican majority will have other priorities, I hope that there are opportunities to work together on a bipartisan basis, as we did last Congress on such important issues as combating human trafficking, curtailing excessive government surveillance and data collection, and addressing the crack powder cocaine sentencing disparity. I look forward to working with you and with all our members, and I'm pleased now to introduce one returning Democratic member of the committee and one new member. First is Adam Schiff, representing California's 30th District. Congressman Schiff returns to the Judiciary Committee after a several-year absence during which he ably served as chairman of the Intelligence Committee and led the House's first impeachment trial against former President Trump. A graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Law School, Congressman Schiff clerked for Judge William Matthew Byrne, Jr., and later served as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles. We welcome Representative Schiff back to the committee. This is also a homecoming of sorts for Congressman Glenn Ivey, representing Maryland's 4th District, who once worked for Chairman John Conyers, Jr. of this House Judiciary Committee. His other Capitol Hill experience includes serving as chief counsel to former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, counsel to former Senator Paul Sarbanes, and chief majority counsel to the Senate Banking Committee. He also worked as an assistant U.S. attorney, as chair of Maryland's Public Service Commission, and was twice elected as state's attorney for Prince George's County. Congressman Ivey is a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School. I want to welcome all of our new members on both sides of the aisle, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. We appreciate your willingness to work with our side. We look forward to working with the Democrats as well, and we welcome back to the committee gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, and our newest member on your side, Mr. Ivey. And now recognize myself to introduce our members, new members, and we have several. We welcome back to the committee Congressman Ben Cline, who represents the 6th Congressional District of Virginia. Representative Lance Gooden. Congressman Gooden represents Texas's 5th Congressional District. Representative Jeff Drew from the great state of New Jersey. We welcome him to our committee. Representative Barry Moore. Congressman Moore represents Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. Representative Troy Nels. Congressman Nels represents Texas's 22nd District. Representative Russell Fry. Congressman Fry represents South Carolina's 7th Congressional District. Representative Harriet Hegman. Congresswoman Hegeman represents Wyoming's at-large congressional district, and Representative Wesley Hunt. Congressman Hunt is from the great state of Texas and represents the 38th district. Representative Kevin Kiley. Congressman Kiley is from California's 3rd congressional district, and Representative Laurel Lee. Congresswoman Lee represents Florida's 15th district. Representative Nathan Moran. Congressman Rand is representative from Texas's 1st congressional district. We welcome all our new members on the Republican side as well to the Judiciary Committee. The next order of business is the adoption of the committee rules for the 118th Congress as required by Clause 2A of House Rule 11. A copy of the proposed rules was distributed to committee members. I will briefly summarize how these rules are different from the rules of the last Congress. First, these rules make modest alterations to improve the operations of the committee, such as codifying the committee's past practice of utilizing an email address for the submission of amendments and other material for the record, harmonizing the treatment of any motions offered in hearings with longstanding committee rule regarding the treatment of motions offered in business meetings, and adding explicit time and manner requirements for the review of transcripts consistent with the length of time that hearing and meeting records remain open, so that all interested parties have consistent and equal opportunity to ensure the accuracy of transcriptions in committee documents. Second, these rules improve the ability of the committee to meet its oversight obligations by modifying the waiting period requirement to share the text of subpoenas with the ranking minority member. The proposed rules distributed to members remove this waiting period to bring our committee in line with the rules of other committees. But after conversations with the minority, we have reached an agreement on a modified procedure that will be adopted through an amendment. I thank Mr. Nadler and his staff for working with us on this bipartisan way on this issue, and I believe the amendment is a good resolution. And creating a standing subcommittee on the responsiveness and accountability to oversight. This subcommittee will ensure that the committee is able to effectively obtain information from the agencies and departments that we oversee. These changes will help to improve committee operations and to ensure that we are conducting the sort of constitutional oversight that the American people expect from us. I urge their adoption. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for any remarks that he may have about the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I predict that you and I will disagree on a great many things in the coming Congress. But I want to thank you at the outset for your willingness to work with us on an accommodation to the proposed committee rules. To be clear, I do not support many of the changes that the chairman proposes. For start, Chairman Jordan's proposed changes to the names of our subcommittees, although purely messaging vehicles, serve as a disturbing indication of this new MAGA majority's priorities. For example, the Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties has been renamed the Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limited Government. Here, the majority appears to have said the quiet part out loud. Civil rights and civil liberties are not, for them, a priority. And it is ironic at best that the subcommittee the Republicans have charged with advancing a nationwide ban on abortion will now do so under the heading Limited Government. I'm also concerned about the creation of a new subcommittee on responsiveness and accountability to oversight. For generations, under chairmen of both parties, the full committee has managed its legitimate oversight needs in the regular course of its work. Why has the chairman created a special subcommittee here and now? I suspect this change amounts to an admission that he will ask the administration for information he knows he cannot have, like the details of an ongoing criminal investigation. And I suspect that the chairman wants this subcommittee in place because when he finds very little evidence to support his investigations, he can fall back on shouting at the Department of Justice for the information it cannot produce. To be clear, I do not dispute the importance of honoring legitimate congressional inquiries. There may be times when, out of respect for the committee, the minority will back the chairman in appropriate oversight requests, even when we disagree with his goals. But creating a forum for the sole purpose of hauling in and yelling at mid-level congressional affairs officers, all of whom serve at the pleasure of agency heads we expect to see at the full committee anyway, seems beneath this committee and sets a dangerous precedent. The process leading to this hearing is also troubling. We first learned about this rules package by majority press release on Friday morning. The chairman offered us no notice or opportunity to discuss the proposed changes before they were made public. The majority did not inform us of the subcommittee ratios until 2 days ago. And of course, this organizing meeting had to be rescheduled because Republican leadership could not get itself organized in time for our original time. I don't know if these unforced errors are a deliberate attempt to trample on minority rights or just an extension of the dysfunction that has characterized the MAGA majority since Congress began. Either way, it is not an auspicious start for the House Judiciary Committee. That said, I do want to thank the chairman for working with us on the provision that caused us the greatest concern, the rules governing unilateral subpoenas. For a decade, under rules developed by Republican Chairman Bob Goodlatte, our committee has authorized the chairman to issue a subpoena without first seeking a vote of the committee. Democrats and Republicans have agreed since the adoption of those rules that such situations should be rare. In other words, setting aside friendly subpoenas in legitimate emergencies, our default position is to authorize subpoenas by markup. The current rules also require that at least 2 calendar days prior to issuing a unilateral subpoena, the chair must consult with the ranking member and provide a full copy of the proposed subpoena, including any proposed document schedule. And the rules as distributed to members, those safeguards would have been completely eliminated. I appreciate, however, that Chairman Jordan and I have reached an agreement to restore those provisions in large part while shortening the required consultation period to 1 calendar day. I want to thank Chairman Jordan for working with me on this issue. I hope that it will mark the beginning of real dialogue. We really can work together when you take the time to hear us out, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member, and I agree with the ranking member's prediction. There will, in fact, be times where we don't agree as we move forward in this committee. The chair now recognizes himself for the purpose of offering an amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Jordan of Ohio. In Rule 4, add at the end the following. C, at least 1 calendar day before issuing any subpoena pursuant to subsection A, the chair shall consult with the ranking minority member regarding the authorization and issuance of such subpoena and shall provide a draft copy of the proposed subpoena, including a draft of any proposed document schedule at that time. D, the chair may waive the requirements of subsection C in the event of an emergency that does not reasonably allow for advance written notice, including, but not limited to, when a witness who is voluntarily before the committee refuses to answer a question.
I think that, the clerk, this is the amendment that Mr. Nadeau and I just talked about, the agreement that we've reached, majority and minority have reached. I urge the adoption of the amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. As I discussed in my opening statement, I appreciate your willingness to work with me on a compromise that will preserve the essence of the previous rule, which protects minority rights while providing some additional flexibility to the majority. A congressional subpoena is a powerful and coercive tool. It should be used only when attempts to reach an accommodation have reached an impasse, and it is my hope that the chairman will use this tool with restraint. I would also hope that the chairman's practice would be to present subpoenas for vote in the full subcommittee in the full committee whenever possible. Our members deserve the opportunity to go on the record on our oversight work, and the public deserves the opportunity to see us do that work in the open. In those cases where a unilateral subpoena is the preferred method, however, it's important that this involve meaningful consultation with the minority. I'm comfortable that the amendment strikes a reasonable balance, and I would urge all members to support it. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. That is entirely our intention. Is there anyone who seeks recognition on the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the committee rules. Excuse me, on the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Florida seeks recognition to offer an amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment to the Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Gates of Florida. In Rule 2, following paragraph F, insert the following and redesignate subsequent paragraphs accordingly. G, at the
Mr.
start
Chairman,
of
I
each
seek
meeting.
unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection. Mr. Gates is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here on the august Judiciary Committee, we are charged with vindicating the constitutional rights of our fellow Americans, and our Pledge of Allegiance is a national symbol of pride and unity. And it was a great honor to be able to invite one of my constituents this morning to offer the Pledge of Allegiance. And so my amendment gives the committee the opportunity to begin each of its meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. It gives our members the ability to invite inspirational constituents to be able to share and lead in the Pledge of Allegiance. I offered this amendment to the Judiciary Rules 2 years ago, and it was defeated, and I'm very optimistic that we'll have a different outcome today. That's the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment. Support the amendment. Does anyone seek recognition? Gentleman from New York, Ranking Member Nadler.
I would oppose it simply on the grounds that, as members know, we pledge allegiance every day on the floor, and I don't know why we should pledge allegiance twice in the same day to show how patriotic we are. As I said, we pledge allegiance on the floor every day. I don't think this is the most important amendment in the world, but since we do pledge allegiance every day on the floor, I think it's unnecessary.
Gentleman from Louisiana, gentleman, you're back. Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
hang on. Recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
I've not seen Mr. Nadler on the floor when the pledge is done, and most members are not present there, so it's not accurate to say we do the pledge every day or participate in the pledge every day. It may be offered, but you're not there for it. This is the work of the Judiciary Committee. This is the committee that has the charge of defending the Constitution and our fundamental freedoms and defending the very freedoms that the flag represents. And so it's a bit absurd to suggest we couldn't take 30 seconds at the beginning of this important work to do what should be done by all Americans. And so I think this is entirely appropriate. I wish we had done it 2 years ago, and I think we missed a lot of opportunities. I yield back.
Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish 2 years ago that on January 6th, that the insurrection never did happen. And I regret the fact that many members of this committee voted against certifying the election results based on the big lie. And they have continued to promote the big lie and undermine public confidence in our government. And so for us to, amidst these folks who supported the insurrection, to be forced to pledge allegiance to the flag, which should be something that none of us have any problem with, but it's just a matter of, it's ironic that this committee, the ones that would not comply with congressionally issued subpoenas, disrespected the rule of law, would now insist that each and every one of us on each and every hearing date come before this committee and pledge allegiance to the flag. I support the Pledge of Allegiance, but it's very ironic, and I just simply wanted to point that out, and with that, I yield back.
Will the gentleman-
I'll yield to the gentleman from New York.
I thank you. I just want to take the opportunity, I think it was one of the people over there. I think it was Mr. Johnson who said that he hadn't seen me pledge allegiance on the floor. I just want to say I pledged allegiance dozens of times. Like other members, I haven't always been there at the beginning of the session, but I've pledged allegiance dozens of times, and I plan to continue doing that on the floor. I thank the gentleman.
Gentleman,
Mr.
I
Chairman.
yield back.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Ice, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this amendment might be more important in light of some of the things that just been said than I even thought it was. This is a committee that needs to come together to defend the Constitution, to recognize the importance of what we do here. And so the fact that on a daily when we meet basis, we do something to remind ourselves of our obligation. Perhaps we should look at our oath of office and not the Pledge of Allegiance, but I think the pledge is shorter and unifying. I regret that my ranking member and my chairman in the last committee digressed from the amendment at hand and the merit of it. And I would hope that all of us would look and say, we've got a long way to go to get back to being a committee that defends the Constitution aggressively and does it on a bipartisan basis. So I think let us all look at this once per hearing opportunity as a reminder of why we're here, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Mr. Issa just made reference to how important it is for us to display our commitment to the Constitution and to commit to defend it aggressively. So I'd like to offer an amendment to the amendment, adding in the second paragraph where the chair may designate an individual to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, to add the following language. Provided, however, the pledge shall not be led by an individual who supported an insurrection against the government of the United States in any way. Because I think if we adopt this amendment, then we will be truthful in representing that stating this pledge is an affirmation of your defense of democracy and the Constitution. It's hard to take that claim seriously if, in fact, an individual who in any way supported an insurrection against the government of the United States is allowed to lead the pledge. So I would ask Mr. Gates to accept this friendly amendment, and I look forward to supporting it.
Would the gentleman yield for
I first ask
question?
Mr. Gates if he'll support the amendment, to make sure that someone who led an insurrection against the United States doesn't make a mockery of the Pledge of Allegiance and stand before this committee with their hand over their heart claiming to support the Constitution.
Mr. Cicilline, my concern would be if your definition of an insurrection is objecting to electors, then there would be many Democrats on the committee that wouldn't be eligible to lead the pledge, since so many
That's not my
objected.
definition of
I mean,
an
the
insurrection.
last Republican president to get sworn in absent
I'll
Democrat
allow
objectors was George Herbert Walker Bush.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Gates, I will allow the chairman to determine whether or not someone has participated in insurrection in the United States. I think this language is important.
Would the gentleman further yield?
I'm asking Mr. Gates, will you now accept the amendment?
Well, I'm concerned that you may be disqualifying too many of your own members, Mr. Cicilline.
I'm not concerned about that at all. Then agree to the amendment. Let's make this real. If you want to give someone the right to stand before the House Judiciary Committee and lead the Pledge of Allegiance, at a bare minimum, let's guarantee that that person has not participated or supported or in any way helped an overthrow of the government of the United States.
Would the gentleman
Seems
yield?
like a simple proposition.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
If you would consider having your language say any convicted felon, I think we would cover not only that group that you're describing, but many more. And I think as the committee of lawmaking in the purest sense, that's really what you're talking about.
No, it's actually reclaim my time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about convicted felons. I'm talking about
Is this
elected.
anyone that you think?
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Issa. I'm talking about elected officials who swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, who in any way participated, supported, facilitated, encouraged the insurrection against the government of the United States. That's not too hard a standard. And if you are not prepared to agree that before you have the honor of leading the Pledge of Allegiance before this committee, at a bare minimum, you've demonstrated a commitment to protecting and securing our democracy, I can't support it. So, Mr. Gates,
Yeah,
I
Mr.
know as a
Cicilline,
lover of the Constitution, you welcome this amendment.
A dear lover of it. Mr. Cicilline, you've described the amendment in two different terms. The words have changed. Facilitate wasn't in your original description. It was in the second one. So if you'd like to write out your amendment pursuant to the order of the committee, we can all take a look at it.
I have it writing right here.
Gentleman yield back.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
You know, I'm almost speechless. I wish we could all just, walk out into the streets of America and talk to people and ask them if they believe the Judiciary Committee should stand up, put their hand on their chest, and pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which represents all the men and women who have sacrificed, lost their lives, all the men and women who've given so much to this country, the purity of this nation, the greatness of this nation. I'm going to tell you, I don't think we should just do it in judiciary. I think in every committee, and I'm sorry, it's so much work. It takes, I don't know, let's time how long the pledge takes. Does it take 60 seconds, 90 seconds? And I know it's a real backbreaker, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay. We can do that little extra mile, stand up, put our hand on our chest, say what we believe, and reaffirm this America that we love. Come on, this can't be real. I can't believe we're having this debate.
Gentleman from New Jersey, yield? Would the
I
gentleman
yield.
Welcome to the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Van Drew. I actually think this is a helpful illustration for the American people of the change that they've made in the House. And I well remember the fervid opposition by the majority then, the Democrats, to the Gates Amendment at the beginning of the 117th Congress. And we've just heard by the commentary that arises from the question of having a permission to say the pledge, the associations the minority draws when that subject comes up. It's undoubtedly an example of what they deplore when they deride a Make America Great Again majority. They use the acronym MAGA as if it's something bad, to make America great again. And when they think of the Pledge of Allegiance, what first comes to their mind? Insurrection. This is where we've gotten to be, though. As I say, welcome to the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Van Drew. You're seeing it in action already. But I'm sure that once we've gotten this amendment through and make some other progress here, we'll restore this body to what the American people expect it to be. I yield back to Mr. Van Drew.
I believe we will. I believe we can all use the exercise, too, of standing up and putting our hand on our chest. I don't think it'll kill any of us. I really, besides all of the constitutional reasons, all of the greatness, how can we waste time arguing about this? Why the heck can't we just stand up and say we love our country and we love our flag? And if we do that more than once a day, is that okay? I think it's okay. I don't mind doing it at any committee hearing. I don't mind doing it on the floor. I don't mind doing it whenever we have the opportunity. I don't get it. I got to tell you, I just don't get it, and I don't believe America gets it. And I don't believe they think it's the right thing. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to ask the staff to provide a copy of West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett to every single member of this committee and just briefly read from that U.S. Supreme Court opinion affecting our public school children. If there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion or force our citizens to confess by word or action their faith therein. So while I absolutely value our Constitution, I believe that while we're having this discussion, we should also look at what the Supreme Court has said on this matter in other contexts, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I would just point out, no one will force anyone to say the pledge. If you don't want to say it, you don't have to say it. But you don't have to stand. You don't have to put your hand over your heart. If that's what you want to do, God bless you. It's America. You can do that. But for those of us who do want to do that, and today we're led by the gentleman who came from Mr. Gates' district with his service to our country, for those of us who do want to stand, put our hand over our heart and say the pledge, I think that's appropriate as well. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Thank the chairman. And I associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from North Carolina about welcome to the Judiciary Committee, the 118th Congress edition. And here we are, and the truth is now laid before you. The gentlelady from North Carolina, in raising this particular issue, is raising, of course, in question why the current United States House of Representatives says the Pledge of Allegiance in the first place on the floor of the House, which the ranking member just used as defense for why we shouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance in this committee room. Because the gentlelady from North Carolina is suggesting to the people of this great country that we should not be standing and pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, for it has a phrase in it, under God. because that is what we're standing here and saying.
Mr. Roy, do you yield?
I'll yield to the gentlelady from North Carolina.
I really don't want to get into a colloquy, but please do not put words in my mouth. That is completely false. Completely false. I wanted to just make the point that this committee and every member of this committee swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And while I take great pride in pledging allegiance in its full form when I'm on the floor of the House and in many, many places, we should look at the full context of every issue. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I appreciate the gentlelady's comments, and I hope we'll be able to engage in colloquy in that level and all issues here in the Judiciary Committee. But I would again remind the American people that the point that we're talking about here is that point. And we believe that it is important for us to come together and pledge allegiance. When I go to any event in the state of Texas, which I represent, any event, the people of Texas that I represent stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. We also stand up in Texas and pledge allegiance to the flag of Texas. I could add an amendment for that here, but that probably gets a little far afield. But we are here, and I think this is important. Again, this is going to be an amendment. Maybe I have like 1 or 2 minutes of debate, but now we're having a full-throated debate because just like yesterday in the Rules Committee of the House of Representatives, when we offered a resolution saying that we stand to thwart socialism, there was complete opposition by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to standing athwart socialism. Literally, a full debate. No, we cannot stand against socialism in the House Rules Committee. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So I just want the American people to understand, in the House Judiciary Committee, we have opposition to pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States. We have questions being raised about whether we should pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and representing that it is one nation under God. We have a Democratic Party that refuses to stand up and say that they oppose socialism and fought it in the House Rules Committee. Presumably will fight it on the House floor. We'll see how the vote plays out. And that is the state of your Democratic Party today. And I would yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I think the gentleman from Texas, and I don't know whether I can engage in a colloquy with my good friend from North Carolina through Mr. Roy, but
I would yield time such that that could occur.
I appreciate that. The question that I guess her citing West Virginia versus Barnett begs is she saying that something about this proposed amendment, the Gates Amendment, to add the possibility of having the Pledge of Allegiance, that somehow offends the Constitution? Is that the purpose? Is that the point that she makes? And if not, what's the purpose of the citation? I yield to Mr. Roy for
I would yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
All I was doing was quoting the U.S. Supreme Court. That's all I was doing. I think you should go back and ask the author of the opinion what the meaning of it was.
Well, if I might engage and ask for the gentleman from North Carolina, for what purpose? I would ask the gentlelady from North Carolina, for what purpose were you making that citation?
So that the Judiciary Committee could be aware of U.S. Supreme Court precedent with respect to this matter. Maybe not everybody on the Judiciary Committee was familiar with that precedent. It was simply a citation.
And reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
To the gentleman's point, and it eludes me. It suggests that having the protocol of a Pledge of Allegiance in the operation and in the procedures of the House of Representatives is somehow compelling an orthodoxy, which that would be a fundamental change to what we've seen in the practice here, but it is illustrative of the moment that we're in, and I yield back to the gentleman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Not only does it not compel orthodoxy, it says may. You may offer do the pledge at the start of a committee hearing. With that, who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Rhode Island who is going to introduce the amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment to the Rules of Procedure offered by Mr. Gates of Florida. In Rule 2, following paragraph F, insert the following and redesignate subsequent paragraphs accordingly. G, at the start of each meeting, the chair or the chair's designee may lead the committee in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Without objection, the
to
amendment is
flag.
considered as read. Gentleman from Rhode Island will explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment is the language that I just read that would add, provided, however, an individual.
The gentleman will suspend for just a second while we get copies to members.
You started it. Thank you.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized to explain his amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the language that I reported just a moment ago. It would add in the second paragraph after the word code, provided the pledge shall not be led by an individual who supported an insurrection against the government of the United States in any way. The only thing I would provide an additional explanation, since the rule authorizes the chair or your designee to lead in the Pledge of Allegiance, that determination would obviously be made by the chair of the committee. But I think it's important language so that we can have some confidence that we don't make a mockery by selecting someone to lead the Pledge of Allegiance who in fact participated in any way in the overthrow of the government of the United States. So I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to accept the amendment and look forward to voting for the underlying amendment from Mr. Gates.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just point out that insurrection is a crime, and it's adjudicated by a court of law and imposed by the verdict of a jury. Conviction of this crime makes the person ineligible to serve in the House. So by definition, no one who's committed insurrection can lead the Pledge of Allegiance in the House because they cannot serve in the House.
Mr. McClintock, will you yield for...
Not yet. It sounds like my friend from Rhode Island wants to be judge, jury, and executioner, which I find a curious position for the House Judiciary Committee to take.
Mr. McClintock, will you yield for a question? Sure. Or a colleague? I don't think the amendment limits the leading of the Pledge of Allegiance to members of this committee. In fact, today we had someone lead us who's not a member of the committee. So I agree with you that nobody on this committee has been convicted of insurrection, but the language doesn't limit the leading of the pledge to members of the committee. So I think your concern is interesting but misplaced.
I wonder who the gentleman thinks would invite someone convicted of insurrection.
Well, I think we should all agree no one who has participated in insurrection should lead the Judiciary Committee in the Pledge of Allegiance. So it shouldn't be complicated to accept this amendment.
Nobody who committed murder is going to be.
Well, then you should vote for the amendment. And you should vote for the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry. Mr.
Strike the last word. I appreciate my friend, Ms. Cicilline, and I enjoy the banter that we have on the committee, but it is unfortunate that we've begun the very first day, the adoption of the rules package by overly politicizing something that should not be politicized. And you and I both know, and whether you want to acknowledge it here or not, this is about politics. This is a completely superfluous amendment. You're making it political to try to make a point, and we get it. It is just very sad that we're wasting time on it. I don't think there's any insurrectionist who's going to show up to offer the pledge, and if they would not be recognized, and so this is completely unnecessary. But I do want to make a note just very quickly about what the gentlelady from North Carolina said. Her invocation of West Virginia v. Barnett, it's a case from 1943. Just so you know, if you know those who are not familiar with the case, that was what the Supreme Court said, that school children could not be compelled to recite the pledge if they had some sort of sincere belief that prohibited them from doing so. We're not school children here. We're supposed to be the vanguard. We're supposed to be the guardians of our constitutional freedoms, our civil liberties, our civil rights, the Constitution itself. And it's just patently absurd to suggest that grown-ups could not make their own decision about participating in the pledge. And if anybody's serving on this committee and is not willing to say the pledge, I would suggest they don't need to be on this committee. Find somewhere else to serve in the Congress. There are some latter precedents, though. That's 1943. 40 years later, in Marsh v. Chambers, the Supreme Court upheld the right to, pray before the opening of a legislative session. In Town of Greece in 2013, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that an invocation, a public prayer before a public meeting such as this, a legislative body, is perfectly appropriate We didn't amend the rules to add that, but gosh, I wish I'd have thought of it. Maybe we should begin with a prayer as well. That would really offend some of our friends on the other side. They have made the effort in the last couple of years to remove "under God" from the witness oath here. That has been a tradition of the United States Congress for as long as anyone can remember. In fact, in our subcommittee, the subcommittee on the Constitution, the chair in the last Congress, Mr. Cohen, who's not present today, actually prohibited the swearing in of witnesses because I demanded as the ranking member that they also say, "So help me God," at the end of their oath. So it just goes to show you there's a strong contrast here between the two sides. It's unfortunate, it's sad, we wish it weren't so. But there are two different parties represented here, two completely different philosophies, two completely different worldviews, and it's on display here on the very first day, in the very first moments of the Judiciary Committee in the 118th Congress. It's just a very stark. I'll yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I also oppose the Cicilline Amendment as it is infinitely regressive. If we are to list out everything that would be disqualifying for someone, as Mr. McClintock mentioned, we'd have to list murder and battery and armed robbery and all the other things that are taking place in all of the Democrat-run cities and states that have defunded police and are continuing to see violence rise. So rather than listing every offense, I think the underlying amendment is sufficient to allow the chair to be able to make a judgment about who could be designated to lead the pledge, and the amendment would be unnecessary and superfluous and regressive. I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman in the time I have remaining. That does remind me that most of the members, at least the members who served on this committee in the last Congress, were on record at some point saying they wanted to defund the police, and that seems a pretty subversive thing. And I read into the record on more than one occasion in this committee their actual statements to that point. So again, don't need to go down this trail. We're overly politicizing something. I oppose this amendment, and I think it is obvious to everybody what this is about. It's unfortunate. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just have to say, I really take offense to the comments that were just made about individuals on this side of the aisle that actually have worked or tried to defund the police, or just are not in support of the United States and the flag. That is extremely offensive. And I know for a fact, Democrats have spent as much time and effort as the Republicans trying to make sure that we are securing all the resources that we possibly can for our law enforcement. We support law enforcement. So I really take great offense to the comments that are made, and I hope that you will gingerly, going forward, not try to just make those kinds of broad statements about my colleagues on this side of the aisle, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, is recognized.
Hey, Sergeant, thank you so much for your service. That gentleman right there represents the best of us all. And the fact that we were having a political conversation about this is actually wrong. The only thing that we want to do is recognize the best, those brave men and women that are willing to give their lives and a sacrifice for us to be able to convene the day in a room like this. I am one of those people. I served in combat. I'm a West Point graduate. I am the kind of person, like that gentleman sitting right there, that's willing to die for this country. For us to sit here together and offer just a little bit of homage to those that are willing to do that, I think it's not nothing we shouldn't be doing. It's actually necessary. You see, that flag represents the deaths of thousands of men and women. 14 of them actually my West Point classmates. And every day that I get up, I look at that flag and I thank God that we are here. So the fact that we get to sit here together and have this conversation based on the sacrifice of that flag and the gentleman that came here and said today should speak volumes to how we should conduct ourselves moving forward in the future. Quite frankly, you are correct, sir. We should be saying the pledge every single day, every single morning, and every single committee. Because when I was in elementary school, that's what I did. And I worked my butt off to be sitting here right now in this room, and the least we can do is to pay homage to the sacrifice of those that have come before us to say, you know what, Democrat or Republican, We are in this together. That flag is the one thing that unites us. Let's just take 30 seconds to put all of our differences aside and say, we can agree that this country is wonderful, this country has done outstanding things, and that brave men and women were willing to die for it. And that's what sets us apart from every other country in the entire world. Every generation stands up to die and fight for that flag. The least we can do is say the Pledge of Allegiance. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The question is on the amendment to the amendment. Gentlelady from, or excuse me, Mr. Klein had been wanting to get in the queue. Oh, then the gentlelady from Indiana is recognized, Ms. Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was not going to debate on this, but I thought it shouldn't be that hard. But actually, one of my constituents a few days ago shared with Ms. Sampson, and I really wanted to share with this committee. It was an essay from a fourth grader from her friend's granddaughter. And the essay was about, what do you think about when you see our country's flag? And I would like to read it. It's a fourth grader, Catherine. When I think of our country's flag, I think of how our soldiers were willing to get killed for us to have our freedom. Our flag shows so much, it just makes me happy because it stands for freedom. It stands for how bad it was and how we won. It all makes me feel protected because it stands for the people who died and freedom, so no one will bother us. It also stands for the freedom of speech, freedom of vote, freedom of worship. This flag lets us do whatever. The flag also shows how much we matter and how hard we tried and how we won. So I really hope that maybe our committee has a little bit more common sense than really, just a fourth grade. It seems to me that we should not debate. We have an issues to debate, but this is show the strength, the unity, what is our republic is about, and how many people died for our freedoms, and how many people are dying for freedoms now to be able to have what we have. This constitutional republic is the best what we have. And I hope we're going to debate real issues, but not the Pledge of Allegiance. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Questions on the amendment to the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment to the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Nay. Opinion of the chair, the nays have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been asked for the amendment to the amendment. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparks?
No.
Ms. Sparks votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels?
No.
Mr. Nels votes no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Hunt votes no. Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swallow? Mr. Swallow votes aye. Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse. Ms. McBath.
Aye.
Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar.
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy.
Aye.
Mr. Ivy votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana, you're not recorded. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 13 ayes and 24 nays.
The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. The question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Mr. Liu is recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I served on active duty in the United States military. I then served in the reserves. I retired after 25 years of service. Let's talk a little bit about what would help the American people. We passed the American Rescue Plan that funded law enforcement. It funded states and counties. It made sure that we brought our economy back on track after a worldwide pandemic. We then passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, led primarily by Democrats, that funded roads, bridges, and highways for the American people. It also made sure we took lead out of our water pipes. It's going to have broadband go everywhere, from rural areas to inner cities and to suburbs. Then we followed that up with the PACT Act. That helped veterans. It helped veterans who were exposed to toxins, and it made sure that they got the just compensation and benefits that they deserve. We also passed the CHIPS and Science Act that brought manufacturing back to the United States, made us and will make us competitive in the important chip market. We also passed the Inflation Reduction Act. That's reducing our deficit, and it's going to have the most amount of climate change projects in world history. We also are not going to crash the United States economy. We're going to raise the debt limit, and we ask Republicans to join us. So I'm going to vote for this amendment, but I would sure like to be voting for lots of other things that actually help the American people. And if we want to talk about whether or not we are going to move this country forward, let's work on real issues. Let's work on how do we make sure we grow our economy instead of doing a hearing on what Twitter said about a widespread New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. Let's focus on preserving and expanding Social Security. Let's make sure we don't have Medicare cuts. Let's make sure we actually pass substantive laws to help the American family. And if we want to talk about how we honor our country, let's make sure everyone complies with the law. And I note that the chairman of this Judiciary Committee ignored and defied a lawfully issued bipartisan congressional subpoena, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I'd request a roll call vote.
The gentleman from Florida has requested a roll call vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Yes. Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Buck? Aye. Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates? Aye. Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Sparks?
Yes.
Ms. Sparks votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes aye. Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels?
Yes.
Mr. Nels votes yes. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes yes. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes aye. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry? Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes yes. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Cicilline? Aye. Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swallow?
Aye.
Mr. Swallow votes aye. Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy?
Aye.
Mr. Ivy votes aye.
Mr. Biggs?
Mr. Biggs, you are not recorded. Mr. Biggs votes aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana, you're not recorded. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye.
Madam Clerk, how am I recorded?
Mr. Massey, you're not recorded.
Massey votes aye.
Mr. Massey votes aye.
And how am I recorded?
Mr. Hunt, you are not recorded. Mr. Hunt votes aye. Mr. Fry, you are not recorded. Mr. Fry votes aye.
Going forward, it's keep this for me, or maybe have someone else keep this.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 39 ayes and 0 noes.
The amendment is adopted. A reporting quorum now being present, the question is on the adoption of the committee rules as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The rules are adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes pursuant to House rules. The rules adopted by the Committee on the Judiciary will be published in the Congressional Record and made available to members of the public on the committee's website. Next order of business is the ratification of the subcommittee assignments. These rosters were distributed to members of the committee and reflect the chairs and ranking members, as well as the members of each respective subcommittee. This roster was created by the Republican and Democrat sides of the committee, respectively. If there's any discussion before we vote on approving the roster,
Sorry, the clerk will distribute.
clerk will distribute the roster then. No. We have two questions that we have to get through yet. The question is on the approving of the appointments of the subcommittee chairs and ranking members as set forth in the roster. You should have the roster in front of you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. We now have to vote on the question is now on approving the subcommittee assignments. The members of each respective subcommittee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the subcommittee roster is approved. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And I think this concludes the committee's business for this meeting. The meeting is adjourned, and we will adjourn this and restart in 15 minutes for our first committee hearing on the border issue. I thank the members, and we're adjourned.
Mexico. These three cities form
no longer just confined to the southwest border. Last week, the chief Border Patrol agent in Vermont tweeted this, quote, "In less than 4 months, Swanton sector's apprehensions have surpassed the combined 2 prior years." Just in the past 4 months, more than the 2 years combined beforehand. Make no mistake, the Biden administration is carrying out its plan. We all heard Secretary Mayorkas sat in front of this committee and said, we are executing our plan on the border. And we all heard President Biden say, we're trying to make it easier for people to get here. Well, they're certainly succeeding in that. Imagine the frustration that our border communities feel when they hear that the damage done to their land and to their businesses, the crimes committed by illegal alien trespassers, and the overwhelmed local resources that are all part of their own federal government's plan. Today, we will hear about some of the effects of Biden's open border policies on everyday Americans and the communities in which they live. We will hear about dangerous encounters with illegal migrants on private property. We will hear about the devastating effects, as I said earlier, of fentanyl on American families. And we will hear about Mexican smuggling cartels exploiting the open border to terrorize U.S. communities. And the worst part is that none of this had to happen. Under President Trump, the border was secure. Under President Biden, there is no border. And Americans are paying the price. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, once he completes his phone call, for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman for yielding. I wish this committee was starting off on a different note. Unfortunately, this hearing is more of the same haphazard, chaotic style we have come to expect of this new Republican majority. We saw them take 15 tries to pick a speaker. We saw them fumble on the opening play by needing to reschedule their first meeting. And now this. The first hearing will showcase the racist tendencies of the extreme MAGA Republican wing of the party that seeks to close the border to refugees from places like Cuba and Venezuela. It almost makes me miss their usual obsession with conspiracy theories and the FBI. Furthermore, this hearing appears to be the latest spat in an ongoing turf war between Chairman Jordan and Chairman Comer. As we all know, Chairman Jordan's plans for his select subcommittee cut deeply into Chairman Comer's jurisdiction. Not to be outdone, Chairman Comer announced that the Oversight Committee will hold its first hearing on the subject of immigration, a topic that is squarely in this committee's jurisdiction during the week of February 6th. Turning the tables on Chairman Comer once again, our majority hastily threw together today's hearing to ensure that we beat the Oversight Committee by a few days, without the government witnesses that the Oversight Committee had time to secure, of course. I suspect this hearing is also an attempt to distract from the fact that Republicans have failed to pass any meaningful legislation in their first month in the majority. As we all know, as part of the rules package for the House, Majority Leader Scalise included 11 ready-to-go, in quotes, pieces of legislation that were set to completely bypass regular order. Many of those fell under the purview of the Judiciary Committee. It appears, however, that these bills were anything but ready to go. Republicans are unable to pass 4 of the bills that were exclusively or partially under this committee's jurisdiction. Most relevant to today's hearing is H.R. 29, the Border Safety and Security Act of 2023. This legislation has been described as, quote, not Christian, anti-American, and trying to ban legitimate asylum claims. And those are not my words. Those are the words of Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas. And he's not the only one. According to the Washington Post, dozens of Republican lawmakers have raised concerns about the scope of this legislation. Now let's turn to today's hearing. There is no doubt that the majority and their witnesses will use the same extreme rhetoric we have come to expect from them. They will tell us that the southern border is open, that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas opened it deliberately, and that it is mostly migrants who are smuggling drugs across our southern border. Of course, none of those statements are true. Yes, significant numbers of individuals are arriving at our southern border, but the Biden administration actually expelled over 1.1 million people last year and recently expanded the use of Title 42, much to the concern of many of us here on the committee. Additionally, the vast majority of drugs we seize are encountered at ports of entry. In fiscal year 2022, only 17% of illicit drugs, including 15% of all fentanyl, were seized between points of entry by the Border Patrol. The rest were seized by the Office of Field Operations, who are stationed at ports of entry. The evidence does not show that asylum seekers are bringing drugs to our shores. In fact, increasingly, drug cartels are recruiting American citizens to bring drugs across the border through ports of entry. We all agree that our immigration system is broken, but let's fix the problems where they are, and not where Fox News talking heads imagine them to be. Sadly, at every turn, this extreme Republican majority fails to offer genuine solutions and resorts to political theater. Our colleagues across the aisle cannot even negotiate in good faith with each other, let alone with us. If that changes, if House Republicans can get their act together and work with us on meaningful solutions to serious problems, as Senate Republicans appear to be willing to work with Senate Democrats, then Judiciary Committee Democrats stand ready to help. But given their behavior these past few months, I have my doubts. Republicans have proposed building a wall, shutting down the asylum system, and defunding the Department of Homeland Security. Those are not serious proposals. They may well play with the extremist base, but they are a waste of this committee's time, and the American people deserve better. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. I would also like to take a moment and express my condolences to Mr. Dunn and his family. I cannot imagine how difficult the loss of your son has been for you and your wife. Thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize our witnesses for today's hearing. I want to thank them for being here. First, I want to yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, to introduce one of our witnesses today.
I thank the chairman. I wish that it were under different circumstances, but I am certainly proud to have a fellow Texan here willing to share the story that he is going to share with us here today. I visited at length with Brandon Dunn and his lovely wife, Janelle Rodriguez. They live in Hays County, Texas, where I live. They live a few miles down the road, and they have 4 children today, and Mr. Dunn will recount the loss of their son Noah last summer. They are a testament to wanting to get positive change out of a loss and working hard to do that. And I'm delighted to have them here to express what they're going to share about the impact of open borders. Hardly a lie, hardly a figment of our imagination, a real impact on real human beings every single day. And they're going to share that here today, and I thank them for coming here. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Arizona to introduce the sheriff with us today. Mr. Biggs is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to introduce to the committee one of the finest lawmen in America, certainly one of the finest lawmen in Arizona, Sheriff Mark Daniels from Cochise County, Arizona. Cochise County is a large county with a fairly sparse population, but sits right on the border. It's in southeast Arizona, borders New Mexico and Mexico. And Sheriff Daniels encounters the reality of what's happening on the border, unlike those who reside in New York who say there is no problem on the border and that the border, to say that the border is open is untrue. We will hear contrary testimony today. It is open, the border is dangerous, drugs pour across, international terrorists, criminal gang members, people from all over the world, indeed over 150 nations, have come through. We can't even vet most of those individuals. Sheriff Daniels has served his county for a long time.
He does a great job, works well with the Border Patrol agents, and has devised a program to protect the communities that he serves in that wonderful southeastern Arizona county, which is a big county. And so we're going to hear more from him, and I'm excited to have him here. He's not only a great advocate, great sheriff, a great family man, but he's a good friend of mine. Sheriff Daniels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar, for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my privilege to introduce to the Judiciary Committee and to the American public a dear friend of mine and a great leader with whom I share much in common, County Judge Ricardo Samaniego. He is the El Paso County Judge, and we have a couple of things in common. I served as El Paso's County Judge for many years in my time preceding my service in Congress. And for those unfamiliar with Texas elected politics, a county judge is essentially the chief elected official, the county administrator in Texas, and they're referred to as judge, even though in many ways they act as the mayor of the entire county. And so Judge Samaniego and I both have been county judge of one of the safest communities in the United States of America, and it is on the U.S.-Mexico border. It is a longtime recipient of migrant populations at our nation's front door, and we are incredibly proud of the role that we play in upholding American values in a way that provides for dignity. Judge Samaniego and I also share another thing in common. We were born and raised and are proud residents of the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas. Judge Samaniego has done a number of things prior to serving in county government. He has been in small business. He has been in human resources. He has been, I think, in the juvenile justice world as well. But Judge Samaniego is here to talk to us about how communities on the border like El Paso have actually been of tremendous service to the federal government. And when given the resources and support, they can be a great ally in ensuring that we preserve the humanity in our system that all of us should want. One last thing that I will say, Judge Samaniego and I both were in public service, I as a congresswoman and Judge Samaniego as the county judge, on a horrific day, August 3rd, 2019, when a domestic terrorist drove over 10 hours to our community to slaughter Mexicans and immigrants, and he used much of the hateful, racist, bigoted, xenophobic language this domestic terrorist did, as many politicians in Washington, D.C. use, as many politicians in Texas use, and unfortunately, as the President of the United States at the time used. He was inspired by that hateful rhetoric, and he used it to fuel his hatred and massacre 23 people in a Walmart in our community. So our words have power. I want to remind our committee of that. Our words have consequences. Judge, thank you for being here. It is a privilege to have you here.
I thank the gentlelady from Texas. Our fourth witness could not be with us today because of the ice storm in Texas. Judge Dale Lynn Carruthers is a county judge and fourth-generation rancher in Terrell County, Texas. She was a lifelong Democrat but switched parties because of the devastating effects of the Biden border crisis on her land and her community. Her testimony was circulated to committee members, but I will briefly summarize her testimony because of what she was going to say, I think is too important for the American people not to hear. Judge Carruthers would have testified that their once safe community now lives in fear. Neighbors' homes have been burglarized, ranchers have been stalked on their own lands, and high-speed car crashes and chases are a daily hazard. One of Judge Carruthers' neighbors even had his home set on fire by illegal migrants who did so in order to get law enforcement to come and pick them up. Her county's limited resources have been overwhelmed because of the flow of illegal aliens across the border. The local high school has had to be locked down due to the criminal activity in their community. Illegal aliens routinely trespass through Ms. Carruthers' land, cutting her fences, and causing other damage to her property. And groups of illegal migrants regularly dress in camouflage to cross the judge's and her neighbor's land. These are not asylum seekers looking to turn themselves into Border Patrol agents, but foreign nationals trying to evade law enforcement. We wish she would have been able to be here today to share her story in person, but we do welcome our witnesses who are here, who were able to travel and are here, and we thank you for appearing. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize the testimony in 5 minutes. I know you were told this earlier. The microphones in front of you have a clock and a series of lights. When the light changes from green to yellow, you should begin to conclude your remarks. It's pretty basic. Green means go, yellow means get ready to stop, red means stop. Mr. Dunn, you may begin, and we again thank you for being here, the work you and your wife are doing in your foundation, and like everyone on the committee, we are sorry for the loss of your son. Mr. Dunn, you got your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, committee, for having me here today. I'm the co-founder of the Forever 15 Project, a nonprofit that my wife Janelle and I started after the passing of our son Noah. On August 21st, Noah died as a result of fentanyl poisoning. More specifically, illicit fentanyl poisoning. He was 15 years old. He was a sophomore at Johnson High School in Hays County. He was murdered by a drug dealer selling counterfeit Percocet pills. The pill he took contained 8 milligrams of fentanyl, which is 4 times the lethal dose. There was no Percocet in the pill. There were no other drugs in the pill besides illicit fentanyl. Noah was the 3rd victim in less than 2 months in Hays County from illicit fentanyl. Kevin McConville, another Hays student, passed away from a counterfeit Xanax that contained illicit fentanyl. And Ryan Garcia, also of Hays CISD, passed away from a counterfeit Percocet pill. Since then, we've attended many seminars and summits, one by the DEA in Houston, Texas. So now we're very familiar with all of the information regarding illicit fentanyl. Illicit fentanyl is primarily manufactured in Mexico by the drug cartels and smuggled through our southern border. And it is true that most seizures happen at border checkpoints. I believe 60% of all fentanyl seized last year was in San Diego and Imperial Valley. However, due to the lethality of this drug, any amount smuggled in a backpack or a fanny pack or even in somebody's pocket can be enough to kill thousands of people. So as you can see, it's not just a border checkpoint issue. Any amount over, I would probably under 1 milligram could be lethal in some instances, but 2 milligrams is the most common number put out there. And without immediate medical intervention, a person is not likely to survive. That's how fast it kills. In our activism work, we've come across several families that have also lost their children to this illegal drug or this illicit drug. And it's both sides of the political aisle. For us, this isn't a political issue. This is an issue about the safety of our children and the citizens of this country. We're working with several state legislatures who are primarily Democrats in our area on legislation to stop this from happening as well. So it's, it's a definite problem that's impacting our communities. I don't have time to read the names, but in the 5 months since Noah's passing, we've met 28 other families who've lost primarily teenagers to this drug. The current statistic is it's the #1 killer from 18 to 45. Honestly, we believe that next year that number will probably drop to 15 to 45. And we've had some children as young as 13 years old die from this drug. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. We appreciate you and your wife being here today. Sheriff, recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Honorable Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to address this committee regarding the status of our southern border from the optics of a community and local law enforcement perspective. I have served our border communities for 38+ years, and prior to that as a member of the United States Army. I currently serve on national, western, and southwest border sheriff associations, and we have 3 objectives: public safety, national security, and humanitarian. In my submitted brief, I have shared with you all the overview of Cochise County and the history of our border. I have personally experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a border county. Currently, this is the ugliest I've experienced. I am proud of our relationships with our local law enforcement partners, local, state, and federal, that serve our communities. To best understand my presentation is to understand we were over 2 years ago. My county was one of the safest border counties based on our collective government efforts, messaging, and yes, enforcement operations supported by the rule of law. What's the direct impact to my county? My citizens and law enforcement address mostly gotaways, the fight and flight syndrome in my county versus those giving up. 100% camouflage migrants being illegally smuggled by the cartels with the price tag of per undocumented alien begins at $7,000 and up. These smugglers include juveniles being recruited via social media by the cartels, border-related bookings. Detention costs within my jail in calendar year 2022 was $4.3 million, absorbed by my local and state taxpayers. Border-related crimes are at an all-time high. Death, murder investigations, aggravated acts against my citizens, failure to yields, search and rescue, plus recoveries, and yes, assaults against law enforcement officials. My deputies have been placed in life-threatening scenarios as the cartels show no regard for my citizens and those that wear a badge. Agents, troopers, deputies, and officers are addressing dangerous scenarios and criminals as a direct result of an open border being exploited by the criminal cartels for violence, fear, and greed. In calendar year 2022, 1,578 suspects were booked in my jail for border-related crimes. Only 78 were foreign-born. In 2021, over 5 million dosages of fentanyl were seized on the Arizona border. In 2022, over 20 million dosages were seized. In 2022, over 12,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized on the southwest border. I want to share a personal tragedy with you of a good citizen named Wanda in my county. She was heading to her 65th birthday party to meet her family and her son when a 16-year-old USC who fled from law enforcement, the deputies, was carrying 3 undocumented aliens, ran his vehicle through a red light at deadly speeds, cutting her vehicle in half and killing her. In closing, my fellow sheriffs and I have tried to partner with this administration to include the President of the United States with high hopes to share a collective message, a collective action plan, support the rule of law, prioritize our southern border, and provide updates reference community impacts and concerns with little to no success. By allowing our border security mission and immigration laws to be discretionary, these criminal cartels continue to be the true winners. Their exploitation of mankind is simply modern-day slavery, allowing thousands of pounds of illicit drugs into our country and that continue to erode core values of families, schools, and subsequently killing an average of 300 Americans every day is unacceptable at any level. Experiencing migrant deaths without a reasonable process why members of U.S. Congress and this administration intentionally avoid reality is gross negligence. Our voice of reason has been buried during what I call intellectual avoidance by this administration and, yes, members of U.S. Congress. Communities have been neglected and banded, relying on our own local and state resources to address border that is in a crisis mode. Our southern border, against all public comfort statements out of Washington, D.C., is the worst shape I've ever seen it. When I look at public safety, national security, and humanitarian on our southern border, this is the largest crime scene in this country. The morale of agents is extremely low, and the collective frustration is very high amongst law enforcement at all levels, and most important, the citizens of my county. With the recent efforts to cancel Title 42, this only serves to complex a border that needs immediate immigration reform by U.S. Congress, but most important, needs to be secured. I'm a true believer that Customs and Border Patrol are the experts of border security, while sheriffs and police chiefs are the experts of community. Together, this is a recipe of success for all communities. I will leave you with this final statement. We all serve the priorities of Americans based on our shared oath of office to keep them safe, enhance their quality of life, and support the rule of law, absent political affiliation or the concern of re-election. I ask each one of you to reflect on this statement as you make your next decision to vote. Once again, I thank this committee for the invitation and opportunity, and now stand ready to answer any questions here in a few minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sheriff. Now recognize Judge Samaniego. I think I got that right. Judge, thank you for being here. You got your 5 minutes. Just hit your mic.
Members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Ricardo Samaniego. I'm an elected county judge of El Paso, Texas.
Judge, can you pull that a little closer? Would you?
Pardon me?
Pull that a little closer. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. El Paso, Texas, one of the safest, largest communities in America and the veterans capital of the USA, where I serve a population almost 900,000 residents in a metroplex consisting of El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. These three cities form a combined international metropolitan area of 2.7 million individuals and constitutes the largest bilingual and binational workforce in the Western Hemisphere. I would like to start by emphasizing that over 4 years ago, Customs and Border Patrol requested the assistance of myself and other local officials. I believe we truly stepped up to the request and facilitated their internal processes. El Paso, Texas has been the epicenter of the migrant surge, both recently and nearly 4 years ago, when border communities such as mine were faced with unprecedented numbers of migrants who were seeking to enter our country through El Paso. We have learned how to safely, humanely, and expeditiously treat asylum seekers who pass through our community on their way to unite with sponsors. I'm here today to share the El Paso story, a success story which strikes delicate balance between security and compassion. However, before I tell you the story, I must disabuse you of information which I personally know to be false. There is no open border in El Paso. Immigrants seeking asylum largely present themselves to Border Patrol for processing. El Paso is required to abide by the same immigration laws that other border communities must follow. There is no invasion of migrants in our community, nor are there hordes of undocumented immigrants committing crimes against citizens or causing havoc in our community. Claiming this continues a false racist narrative against these individuals or perpetuates violence that the El Paso community is all too familiar with. When our citizens were target of a racially motivated mass shooting August 3rd, 2019, they killed 23 El Pasoans and Mexican citizens and wounded 26 other innocent bystanders. Our community was deeply devastated by this tragedy. Thirdly, humanitarianism and security are not binary choice. It is the federal government's responsibility to do both. Provided with a sufficient financial support, we can assist the federal government in fulfilling its mandate. Our initiatives, efforts, and processes are directed to avoid any type of chaos. When El Paso County was faced with the increasing number of asylum seekers, we established a Migrant Support Service Center to assist migrants to connect with their relatives and sponsors and guide them with a same-day self-paid travel arrangement process. Approximately 35 to 45% of these migrants fall in this category. The benefit of this process is that migrants are moved quickly and safely out of our community at their own expense. The center opened on October the 10th, 2022, and has a capacity to assist up to 1,000 per day. To date, the center has assisted 26,829 asylum seekers. No immigrant is placed on a bus and shipped to another city without coordination and a sponsor waiting at the receiving city. El Paso's partnership with Catholic Charities of Houston is a great example of interjurisdictional cooperation with federal funds. Catholic Charities chartered a bus daily traveling from El Paso to Houston with 52 passengers, manifested with confirmed self-paid travel for flights out of Houston the following day. This model initiated discussions with collaboration with other interstate and intrastate partners such as Dallas, Austin, and Denver. When the city of El Paso declared a disaster, we did not get the resources we needed, but instead saw the state of Texas National Guard, the placement of barbed wire lined haphazardly in certain areas, and pseudo barriers of tanks and cargo containers were put up. Prior to the city's declaration, I had sent correspondence and communicated with various state officials that what my community needed was assistance with transportation, staffing, food, and sheltering. The state never addressed these needs that we requested. To be sure, we cannot locally resolve the immigration issues facing our country. So I finally want to take the opportunity to thank our Congresswoman, Veronica Escobar, for her leadership and for consistently ensuring that the federal government is aware of the realities on the ground. So I thank you for being here. I welcome you to our beautiful community. I would love to host, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunn, yeah, I know the list of names of people who, in many cases, thought they were taking one drug and died of fentanyl is long. One of the names that you probably have on your list is Matt Capolato in Riverside County, and his daughter, who thought she was taking a Xanax and died. She actually only took half of it as part of her study routine and died of fentanyl overdose. That has led to a murder charge in Riverside County, and our district attorney is prosecuting that. How it will end, we'll see, but it certainly is an example of the kind of response that I hope both the federal government and the state and local will start looking, that these people who traffic in that leading to these tragic deaths. And I want to thank you for being here today. Sheriff, I'm going to primarily talk to you because the judge, I think rightfully so, gave us a good example of facilitating undocumented workers who have been released in this country getting around the country and all the humanitarian work they do. First of all, are those the people you run into?
Congressman, it's not. We don't give the give-ups. I can't remember, speaking with our Border Patrol CBP agents, we don't get give-ups in Cochise County. What we get is the gotaways, the ones that are camouflaged 100% from booty to headgear, that fight and flight, do whatever it takes to get away from us.
So out of 5 million people that have come here, we could be talking, the judge could be talking about 1 million who just want opportunity, maybe jobs. But that's not who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the other at least 1 million who are often repeat criminals and are evading in order to perpetrate crimes.
That is correct.
I want to go through a couple of quick quotes because you're at the border. I too am at the border. I have a little over 50 miles of the Mexican border in California. And so these quotes are particularly important to me. The Secretary of Homeland Security said, "The border is closed, the border is secure," in March of 2021. Was that true then?
No.
Is it true now?
No.
He additionally said, "We are working day in and day out to enhance its security." He said that November 16, 2022. Had you seen that kind of improvement?
No, I have not.
You haven't as of today. Just a few days ago, he said, "The border is not open." Would you agree with that?
No, and if I could support that statement also, the majority of people, just to give an example, we have an interdiction team that goes out almost daily. Yesterday, they were out for their shift, had 15 smuggling events We had a media crew riding with him yesterday. And the majority of people we talked to, the migrants that have been smuggled, which I call modern-day slavery, what they're doing to these people, they tell us the reason they're here is because President Biden and the welcoming sign.
Now, the Vice President said just a few months ago, the border is secure. We have secured the border. Would that also be inaccurate?
Yes, it would.
Now, a lot of people talk about the Trump era versus now. Is it fair to say that it got better, but it was still a difficult time for you even then with some of what you were dealing with at the border?
Yes, after 38, almost 48 years of working this border, I've seen the good and the bad, the ugly. It was better under President Trump. This is, like I said, this is the worst I've seen, mainly because of the aggression by the cartels and the aggravated acts toward law enforcement in the community.
And I want you to take the remaining time and just tell us that difference between the Trump era and now with the border wide open. What does it do for your ability to provide law enforcement for other purposes to your county?
Well, with the amount of arrests we had in 2022, our border population, or it's been border crimes that's been arrested and booked in my jail, equates to about 40 to 44% of all the population in my jail. You equate that back into the patrol side of it for the troopers, the local law enforcement, sheriff's office. We're spending a lot of time keeping our community safe, diverted from the normal stuff that we do, the proactive stuff, into addressing border crimes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Ranking Member Mr. Nadler, is recognized.
I thank the chairman for yielding. Mr. Dunn, again, I want to express my sincerest condolences to you and your family, and I want to thank you for being here today. Judge Samaniego, I want to turn to you. Thank you so much for coming today. Having a witness who has grown up and lived on the border is so imperative. Your knowledge and lived experience are invaluable for policymakers here in Washington. Unfortunately, the Republican majority seems interested only in showboating. They continuously talk about a so-called Biden border crisis, even though this administration has actually kept in place numerous policies from the Trump administration that many of my colleagues and I have expressed concerns about. Judge Samaniego, in your testimony, you note safety and compassion are not mutually exclusive. I think this is a very important point. As Republican Representative Tony Gonzalez stated over the weekend, border security and immigration are two separate topics. One can be for a strong border security presence that prevents terrorists, fentanyls, and bad actors from entering our country, and one can be for welcoming future Americans in through the front door. Judge Samaniego, can you discuss how El Paso has balanced these two competing dynamics, ensuring the safety of its citizens while also being compassionate toward migrants?
Thank you. One of the things that we recognized is our collaboration. We're not reacting at this point. We've been working 4 years. Almost every Friday we meet with law enforcement, we meet with Border Patrol, the diocese, the NGOs, and we know that by doing what we do right, the whole nation benefits from that. If we do not process the migrants properly, then it falls on other cities. I think El Paso is extremely focused on the fact that we're not a community, but a part of a nation. And if we do not do the right things, then New York gets hit and other communities get hit simply by the fact that there's an unorganized process. Our strategy is really very organized, very compassionate, and making sure that we get individuals in the right place at the right time. And so when we have someone like from New York that comes to El Paso, the mayor, to tell us to help him through this process, obviously, that's why we're there. Our impact is not just on our community. Our impact, I believe, it's on the values of our Constitution, the values, in my case, as a Democrat, and we make sure that we're helping the rest of the country. We don't do things right, and I can guarantee you that the impact is going to fall on the other cities around the country.
Thank you. We keep hearing from our Republican colleagues that the border is open and that Biden caused this crisis. Could you comment on this?
Well, we don't see that. We process every individual that comes through. We make sure we coordinate. We get a lot of information. And I must emphasize, it was the Border Patrol and the federal government that asked us to step up as a community. And when we don't do the right things, it backs up their system. They start getting more and more people. The detention centers are extremely limited compared to what a community can do. So either you put the pressure on the federal government, or you put the pressure on a community that has, almost 14 sites where we could get people sheltered. We can process people, like I said, 35 to 40% are individuals that already have a sponsor, they have money, and they can move into the communities and other communities. We get a lot of calls of a lot of states and cities throughout the country that want migrants. And if we do the right thing and we process them, then we could get the migrants to them as well as to help our community. And we talk about three things. It's safety, which is extremely important for our community, humanitarianism, and the economy. We do not do things right, and I can guarantee you it impacts the entire economy. We've seen it when things begin strained and the movement of product doesn't come into the country. We get hit extremely hard. We get a lot of calls about not moving traffic properly, and we're one of the largest movers of products in the whole country. So we do things right, and I feel that everybody gains from our efforts.
Thank you. One of the topics you touched on in your testimony is the need for all levels of government and nonprofits to work together to effectively process the migrants who are crossing the border. Do you have a good relationship with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection? And can you discuss how often you coordinate with them?
Every once a month we help. Well, one of the missing elements is that we don't get support from the state. And if we had the three, you need the local government, you need the federal government, and the missing component, and because of political reasons, we don't get that third part of the stool. And that is extremely, extremely important to us. We need their support. We don't need militia. We don't need policing. Our strategy has been extremely effective without using law enforcement. And we suffer tremendously by not having the proper support from the state government.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since President Biden took office, we have seen a tremendous surge in the terrorist watch list arrests at the southern border. There were 2 terrorist watch list arrests in fiscal year 2017, 6 in 2018, 0 in 2019, 3 in 2020. In 2021, President Biden's first year in office, terror watch list arrests surged to 15. In 2022, there were 98 terrorists arrested at the southern border. In this fiscal year so far, there have been 38 arrests. According to Border Patrol, there have been approximately 1.2 million known gotaways since President Biden took office. In November alone, 73,000 border crossers evaded overwhelmed Border Patrol agents, but were detected by other forms of surveillance. These crossers are known as gotaways. Often these border crossers are evading being caught by Border Patrol because they have a criminal record or contraband to hide, unlike most migrants who cross with the explicit intention to meet Border Patrol. But today I want to ask about other sinister news in the immigration space. I have a copy here of an email circulated last Thursday, January 26th, at Mount Pleasant High School in Rhode Island. Its assistant principal, Stephanie Harvey, someone with a doctorate in education, is fundraising among its faculty and staff to pay a debt to a cartel that trafficked a student. The email, calling it an urgent matter, reads, "We have a student who came to America with Coyote, which is a group that helps people. This group gives you a time frame to make a payment of $5,000 to those who bring them into the States. Our student needs our urgent support to raise another $2,000 to meet his goal of $5,000 by February 1st, 2023. Sheriff, is this helpful?
I'm sorry, sir?
Is this helpful to have faculty raising money to pay a Mexican cartel to bring someone into the country?
Congressman, no.
Okay. The ranking member said that many of President Trump's policies have been continued. Is the fence continuing to be built on the southern border?
No.
Is the Remain in Mexico policy being continued?
No.
Is the agreement with the Northern Triangle countries to immediately deport illegal immigrants who come into this country, has that policy been continued?
No.
Sheriff, let me ask you something. We now have in this country 2 million individuals who have gone through the entire process and have been adjudicated for removal. In other words, they came to this country, they applied for asylum, they weren't entitled to asylum, they came here for economic reasons. So they went through, they had due process, they have been adjudicated, they have been ordered removed, and the President of the United States has instructed ICE not to seek those individuals and remove them from the country. 2 million. What's the impact of an order like that in terms of welcoming people who are coming to this country for all the wrong reasons?
Well, Congressman, that's one of the things that has changed with the two administrations that I've seen is the former president had a very strong message.
When you say former president, President Trump?
Yes, sir. That if you come to the country, you break our laws, there's consequences. Under the current one, that's not being, the rule of law is not being fulfilled.
Okay, and I guess just to further that a little bit, the impact on individuals that are considering coming to this country. When they know if they come to this country, there's going to be a consequence, a negative consequence for them, or, and I'm not even talking about a welcome mat. We welcome immigrants to this country. We welcome people who want to go through the process the right way, who want legal immigration. But when they know that they're coming to this country and there is no consequence to come to this country illegally, and even when they lose in court and they are ordered removed, the United States won't remove them under this administration, and there is this hope for an amnesty program to go through Congress or informally, as President Obama did, and this president will probably do the same thing, issue an executive order with the stroke of a pen to give people amnesty. What is the impact on people being attracted to this country for all the wrong reasons?
Well, Congressman, there's a couple. Number one is they keep coming, and we're seeing that on the border. Number two, it's a fracture of our rule of law, the oath that I take, you all take, and share it. And last but not least is it's an insult to all law enforcement, state, local, and federal, trying to do our best to secure this border.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have two articles that I'd like to offer for the record. One from Fox News, published January 28th, and another one published December 1st.
Without objection, they'll be entered into the record. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just thank you, Mr. Dunn, for your compelling testimony and offer my deepest sympathy and prayers for your family and your lost son. All of us feel that way on this days. I just, you know, it's important to note that I think every member of this committee wants to have order at the border. We want laws that can be enforced, but we also need to take a good look at really what's happening. And if you take a look at who's coming into the United States without benefit of a visa, it's a mix. Some individuals are coming from communist countries like Venezuela or Nicaragua or Cuba, and they're coming to seek asylum because they've been persecuted. That's permitted under immigration law, and yet the numbers have made it difficult to process that in an orderly way. Some are coming, just like my grandparents, because for economic reasons. They want to have a better life for them and their family, and there's really, in most cases, no way for that to happen in a lawful manner. And some are bad guys, and especially they're coming through more rural areas, and I think that's why the sheriff is seeing what he's seeing. And I think it's important as we think about what to do and what strategies that will be effective, we need to think about those different categories of individuals. We spend more money today on the Border Patrol than ever before in the history of the country. We spend more money on immigration enforcement than all other federal law enforcement combined. So it's not as if we're unwilling to pay for enforcement, but I note that the wall that some feel will be the answer, on average, was breached last year once every 11 minutes. It was breached over 4,000 times. So I don't know that that's really the answer that people think it is. Now, taking a look at the Cubans and the Nicaraguans and the Venezuelans, for example, the administration created a parole program just recently for a safe and organized process for migrants seeking protection as asylum seekers. And when they did, the number of people coming irregularly dropped. My understanding is that between the ports of entry, individuals seeking asylum from those countries dropped 97%. And if you put yourself in the place of that individual, if there's a way to get safe haven, you're going to take that rather than risk your life, walking through the jungle. What we don't have is reform of the immigration laws that would give some opportunity for people seeking economic advancement to have a hope that that could happen. And I think that's really on us, on the Congress. In this last Congress and the Congress before that, we had a Farm Workforce Modernization Act. It got broad support, a big bipartisan vote in the Congress. It died in the Senate. But we know that more than half the farm workers in the United States are undocumented, and yet we need farm workers in the country. If there's a way to have an orderly system, I think that would help us a lot as a country. And so we all want order at the border. We want, to save, a humanitarian crisis is not best solved at the border. We need to take a look, and I've urged that not just the United States, but other Western Hemisphere countries work together to try and bring stability to the 3 countries in Central America that are really the origin of many of those fleeing. And we have not succeeded at that. So let me just close with this, Judge. You've seen the people coming in to your city. Have you, why are they coming to the United States, the people that you've met in your city?
Well, they're extremely passionate. I wish most of our citizens had the passion and the desire to be in our country like they do. I've heard a lot of different stories. One of them is the fact that they stand up for their rights in their country, and then they're persecuted because of that. They're asked not to do those kinds of things, like they get targeted. I get a lot of them telling me that they're still. Their parents will call and say, they go to my house every single day and find out where I'm at. And so they're very passionate about coming here, extremely passionate about working. They all say the same thing, that they're very willing and able to work here in the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time has expired.
The lady yields back. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunn, we mourn the loss of your son, Noah, and hundreds of thousands of other victims and families who have been irreparably damaged by this catastrophe. I would note that, of course, China and the Mexican drug cartels are taking full advantage of this wide-open southwest border. We all know that. That's what the testimony reflects. We've recorded record amounts of deadly fentanyl that are coming into American neighborhoods all over the country. Last year alone, over 100,000 Americans died of a drug overdose, and the fentanyl poisoning is a key component of that, and we know it. My questions are going to be for the sheriff, but I just want to recount a couple of facts here so that everybody back home can take account. Since President Biden took office, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials have encountered over 4.5 million illegal aliens across the southwest border. It's been said a few times. We're going to say it repeatedly today. The number is disastrous. If we do not have a border, we do not have a nation. We cannot maintain our sovereignty and security if we don't have a border. But nearly 1.7 million of those illegal aliens encountered across the southwest border have been released into America's communities. They're coming into my community, my state, and all of ours. It's all over the country now. During fiscal year 2022, CBP encountered 2,378,000 plus illegal aliens, the most in any single year. That broke the record from 2021, which is the second largest number. Just during December 2022, CBP encountered 251,487 illegal aliens crossing the border. It's the highest number ever encountered in a single month. The point is, this gets worse and worse and worse. And why is that? Well, because the Biden administration has been reversing the vast majority of the Trump administration's successful border enforcement policies, and they are systematically, they are intentionally, Secretary Mayorkas and his administration, they are dismantling immigration enforcement. They are encouraging illegal immigration, encouraging it, inviting people to come here. That's been happening for the last 2 years. It's beyond refute. That's what the evidence shows. That's what everybody can see who cares to pay attention to this. They've terminated the construction of the border wall. The Biden administration issued orders restricting immigration officers' ability to arrest, detain, and remove aliens who violate U.S. law. I can go on and on and on and on. But Sheriff Daniels, you've been in law enforcement for nearly 4 decades. You testified, you gave some very compelling testimony this morning about all the problems that you've encountered. And the question is, have you tried to share those concerns with the Biden administration? And if so, how did the administration respond?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. We actually have, on behalf of National Sheriff Association, I chair border security for national sheriffs, but our national sheriff senior leadership has attempted through letters to reach out to President Biden. He's been invited to our events with major county sheriffs, western sheriffs, Southwest border, and national. We have never got a response back from this president. In fact, I was told just a couple months ago, he's the first president not to meet with sheriffs in this country. And he still has not to date, to my knowledge. Second to that is we did meet with Secretary Mayorkas. We reached out. I assembled about a dozen sheriffs. We met in El Paso. We sat down with the secretary. We gave him a 16-point action plan to share, to look at, we thought were common sense, humanitarian and public safety, national security objectives built within that. Never heard back. I asked the secretary where that plan was, what they were going to do with it. He asked me what plan. So long story short is we've never got a response back from the secretary.
It's an absolute dereliction of duty. It is inexcusable. And because of Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration's abandonment of any semblance of security on the border, what policies or procedures have you had to implement to cover for that?
Well, again, it goes back to where the honorable judge is talking about the absence of the state. We have the absence of the federal government. One thing I'll say, I think it's important to your question is, I work with many Border Patrol agents, federal agents, and to date, I have not heard one say that it's working. The morale, the frustration they feel, the frustration we feel, and let's not forget, we all serve communities in this country. We've had to step up our game. Again, when you look at 40 to 44% of all your crime is coming through the border. In my rural county, I don't have the pleasure of the resources like El Paso, which is urban in nature, that we've had to step up, and thanks to Governor Ducey and our state legislative folks, the $4.3 million, they're helping me pay those bills. In a rural county, that's a huge impact. When it comes to our interdiction teams, our camera system, you name it, the state's helping us.
I'm out of time. I yield back, but I thank you for your service and all those brave men and women who are serving in that impossible situation. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunn, my condolences to you on the loss of your dear son. And Sheriff Daniels, thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
For years, we've listened to MAGA Republicans decry a so-called invasion at our southern border. Now that they have a House majority, MAGA Republicans are in charge, and MAGA Republicans are responsible for coming up with solutions, but unfortunately, this hearing is nothing more than a distraction from the fact that my MAGA friends cannot agree on the problem or the solution. The House Republican border security plan is so extreme that it is opposed by dozens of their own members. Their plan has been called extreme, anti-American, and not Christian. And that's how Republicans describe it. What we do know is that the MAGA Republican plan will shut down asylum to everyone, including those fleeing communist totalitarian regimes and young children who are crossing the border alone to flee gang violence. This draconian and cruel policy will only diminish America's standing in the world. Meanwhile, President Biden has shown that we can lower the number of unauthorized border crossings while still treating migrants with dignity and humanity. Immigration is much more than a scary B-roll on Fox News or inflammatory Twitter posts. It's about our fellow human beings, migrants who arrive with nothing but the clothes on their backs, work hard to build new lives here. Indeed, immigrants are important for our communities and our economy because of the skills they bring to the contributions that they make to our society. New Americans in my district are small business owners who pay their taxes, enrich our neighborhoods, and help newer members of the community. For example, they've set up numerous businesses and vibrant and economically successful locations where they can even employ other immigrants and Americans. At Refugee Coffee in Clarkston, Georgia, they even have a food pantry where they leave groceries for anyone that might be in need. Immigrants are vital to my district, and we appreciate them. Now, while Republicans resort to political stunts at the border and theatrical hearings like this one, Democrats stand ready to fix a broken immigration system. We have a responsibility to act, and we stand ready to work with serious Republicans to pass meaningful solutions. Judge Samaniego, thank you for being here. I'm fortunate to be traveling with my colleague, Veronica Escobar, to El Paso tomorrow. What can you tell me that we should be looking for on our visit tomorrow?
I believe the unity of what happens when a community decides to work together. You know, we're called El Paso del Norte was our first name, and so we've been doing this for centuries. People pass through our community. We know how to do this in a humanitarian way. We are very, very organized. We have a strategy that I think that people should look at. That, you know, especially this idea of getting communities to send buses to us so that we can have sponsors and migrants that go to their community. So our strategy works. It only doesn't work when we're not funded properly. At any point, we're able to handle large numbers, but then we don't get the proper funding. And when we talk about, like Secretary Mayorkas, so when he came down, he immediately was able to help us with FEMA funding, allowed us to move the processes. And when you push them back into Juarez, all you're doing is creating more anxiety, you're creating more desperation, you're creating more issues, not only for us, but for a community that works, you know, on an economic level. There's no border that works in such an economic level. And to push them back, I think is extremely reckless of our neighbors.
Well, let me stop you there and ask you this last question. According to CBP, from January 2021 to January 2023, only 8 undocumented immigrants were arrested for fentanyl smuggling at the southern border.
That's correct.
Compared to 119 U.S. citizens. Is it your experience that an increase in migrants is tied to an increase in fentanyl?
We haven't seen that because, first of all, they come with very little things. I mean, they get a backpack, they get, you know, they're carrying things that are very easy, they're vetted very properly. Not only are they vetted with Border Patrol, we vet them as well. We vet them at the shelters, so we're constantly looking for that. We're taking care of the nation. We're not gonna allow someone to bring drugs in and unwittingly. I mean, we're gonna do everything possible to be part of that process.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunn, you and your wife, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your testimony and your willingness to share your experience and express my sympathy and condolences to you, and appreciate the work that you're doing now. I want to just clear 2 things up briefly, though. The figures just cited by my colleague from Georgia are ports of entry only and do not reflect between ports of entry arrests for fentanyl transportation. So please don't ever let the facts get in the way of a good narrative from the other side. Not only that, when the gentlelady from California said she supports an orderly system for legal migration, we have an orderly system for legal migration. That's why 1 million people are brought in legally every year. The numbers that you hear are between the ports of entry, because that's where CBP operates. So when CBP talks about the number of encounters being 4.5 million, that's between the ports of entry. Sheriff Daniels, how big is your county?
It's just under 6,300 square miles with 83 miles of international border,
And what's the population?
about 125,000.
How many NGOs do you have that deal with the flow of international or illegal migrants coming across?
Maybe 1 or 2, 3. Most of them come from outside, not within the county.
I know Yuma County has one. So that's interesting. So when we look at this, are your deputies ever dispatched to deal with criminality or situations involving illegal aliens?
On a daily basis, yes.
How often? How many times per day?
Throughout the day, usually when I check on them, they're in some kind of issue with border security or immigration, and when I go home, I hear calls. I mean, it's throughout the whole day.
What sorts of dangers does your department and your deputies specifically encounter because of these interactions?
Well, the biggest thing we're addressing right now is out of the 1,578 people that came to my county, 1,500 were U.S. citizens coming down to commit international crime. Based on greed, they're getting paid $3,000 per person to drive them 3 hours north up to Phoenix, Arizona, in your neck of the woods, Congressman. It's a game of greed, but when they get in those cars, they pick them up along the highways, they take off at 100-some miles an hour. That's resulting in death. It's putting my citizens in risk. We see it almost every day in my county, and that's been deadly for us.
So if I understand what you're saying, cartels are recruiting American citizens from as far away as the Valley of the Sun, the Phoenix area, to come on down and transport people who have illegally entered the country up to Phoenix for further distribution throughout the country.
Congressman, that's correct, but to take it one step further, from the United States, we get them from the Midwest, we get them from all over. We have a map where we get them from in our office.
And what's the going, and you said, what was the going rate that they get paid per person?
We started an operation back in March called Safe Streets, collective effort of state, local, and federal law enforcement trying to do some interdiction to protect our citizens. It was like $1,000 to $1,500. Right now it sits at $3,000 per person.
Have you ever had juveniles come down to drive as well?
Yes, I believe last year we apprehended and charged, I think it was around 100 juveniles that were remanded as adults for driving, and all the way up to underage where they don't even have a license. We had a couple weeks ago, we had a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old driving a car, picking up, I think, 5 undocumented.
And this is human smuggling?
This is human smuggling, yes.
You've given us some pictures that are up here on display. What are those pictures of?
The picture on the right side of the white truck and the red car. The red car had a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, and I believe a 14-year-old, and they were down from the Pinal County area, which is up by Casa Grande, down here to pick up migrants, working with the criminal cartels and a scout. The car saw one of my deputy sheriffs, took off at a high rate of speed, hit the white car, and then crashed. All 3 were in critical condition, and then were ejected from that vehicle.
And this other one?
The other one was a vehicle out of Phoenix. It was a stolen vehicle that was in one of our business areas in a business parking lot. The Border Patrol saw them. They took off at a high rate of speed, got into a pursuit. It rammed the Border Patrol agent, the unmarked car, and they were apprehended with illegals.
There's so much more to talk about. I'm sorry I'm out of time. Thank you for being here, Sheriff Daniels.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ranking Member Nadler for welcoming me back to the committee. Mr. Dunn, thank you for your testimony today, and I want to join my colleagues in expressing my condolence over your terrible loss. Since I last held a seat on this committee over 10 years ago, our country has undergone some of its most turbulent years, from attacks on our democracy to increasing gun violence, including 4 mass shootings in my home state of California in just the last week, to continuing acts of racial injustice. Many of the issues that Americans are most concerned about fall within this committee's jurisdiction. But instead of tackling those concerns or joining Democrats in a comprehensive immigration reform, many Republicans in Congress seem intent on demonizing migrant families and asylum seekers, portraying them as fentanyl traffickers and violent criminals. In the real world, asylum seekers are vulnerable individuals and families fleeing political persecution and torture. And these terrible stereotypes that my Republican colleagues are peddling have real-world consequences and bring real-world harm as they increase the level of hate and violence directed at immigrants here at home. More than that, let me just take this opportunity to recognize the many immigrants who risked their lives during the pandemic to take care of us when we were sick in the hospital with COVID, who brought food to our grocery stores and delivered goods to our doors, who worked in our fields so we would not go hungry, and who died disproportionately because they could not work from home. I want to say thank you for your courage. Our country is better off for having you here. I want to start my questions by debunking a couple pernicious stereotypes. First, when it comes to drug trafficking, CBP reports that over 83% of smuggled fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine is discovered during vehicle inspections at ports of entry where people enter the country legally. Not smuggled by migrants, but driven across the border by U.S. citizens engaged in criminal activity at ports of entry. Judge Samaniego, the fentanyl crisis is real, but how is it really entering the country in your experience, and who is doing the smuggling?
Well, as you said, Congressman, they're coming in through the port of entries. We do not get a lot of information of migrants doing that. As I said earlier, the fact that they're not carrying much with them and the fact that they've been vetted as they come in when we process them. And that's why I keep insisting that an organized way of processing and our ability to be able to process properly is really helping tremendously. When we do not do that and it pushes the migrants who have to go further out, that's when you start having these illegal entries because there's not a way for them to come in properly and meet the Border Patrol there at the border. And so we know that going further creates risk for them. They get preyed on. There's so many things happen by not following the process. And when we're allowed to do it and we're supported and funded properly, I think we do a lot for our country.
Thank you, Judge. Second, relative to undocumented immigrants, and using Texas as an example, U.S.-born citizens in Texas are more than twice as likely to be arrested for violent crimes and 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes. Judge Samaniego, can you speak to the experiences and interactions you've had with migrant families and asylum seekers at the border? What is the real-life impact that such anti-migrant rhetoric and misinformation have on these communities?
Well, it's just, it's heartbreaking, obviously, that why they're coming in, they want to work. I'll give you an example. We've had individuals that were held back because they got caught up in, not being able to go back because of Title 42. And they were asking for, give us brooms, give us bags. We want to help us. We do not want to be perceived as lingering or burdening your community or any part of the country. And they talk a lot about the fact that they're wanting to work, they're passionate about working, and they're ready to do something for our country. We do not get, I interact with them completely. I work with the unaccompanied children, and I have a lot of exposure, and I feel extremely confident that the majority of them have no interest in drugs or doing anything like that, other than to work and to participate and be part of the dream that they're looking for. And a lot of them, like I said, they're coming out of desperation of how they're treated in their countries, how they're persecuted, and they're looking for a better life. I do not, I stand here saying, with all honesty, that I do not see or understand some of the things that are said here today about them wanting to be part of drug cartels or putting them in that situation. It's just completely opposed to what I've experienced there in El Paso.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Judge.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Yield to Mr. Roy.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. I thank the witnesses for being here. I just want to clarify the record here for a second. The idea that the fact that fentanyl is caught at ports of entry and that is the only place that is coming through is belied by the facts, and is belied by the facts that the Border Patrol is now distracted processing human beings, just as the judge from El Paso just described, but just ignores the impact on what that does to the actual border. The Border Patrol can't possibly catch all of the fentanyl at the ports of entry, nor catch the fentanyl between the ports of entry. Mr. Daniels, do you agree with that assessment?
I do. We've had a depletion in Border Patrol because they've been taken to other areas where processing is more important.
And is it your experience that fentanyl pours in between the ports of entry and that fentanyl does in fact get into our communities in mass quantities today due to our open border?
Yes.
I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Dunn, obviously in the introduction, I talked about you being from the county in which I live, in Hayes County. You testified, Mr. Dunn, earlier that it was not just Noah who passed away in Hayes County last year due to fentanyl poisoning in our community. Is it not true that 3 other Hayes Independent School District students died from fentanyl overdoses in our community in Hayes County last summer? Is that accurate?
That's correct. And a 4th 14-year-old died in January of this year.
Just a couple of weeks ago?
Yes.
Another
and
family?
During the Christmas break, 6 other students were poisoned by fentanyl, but they were successfully saved.
And last summer, there were another 8 who were brought back through the use of Narcan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Dunn, your lovely bride, Janelle, is Hispanic, yes?
Yes.
Do you believe that believing in a secure border makes one racist or anti-Hispanic?
Not in the slightest. Her family actually holds that same position.
I thank you for that. You guys have been active now in a number of organizations trying to get out and understand the lost voices of fentanyl. Is that right?
Yes.
Worked with Ms. Virginia Krieger.
Yes.
And she's lost her daughter due to Percocet that was laced with fentanyl. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the people that have been the lost faces of fentanyl, and I've done this before. Noah is one of these lost voices due to fentanyl now.
He is now. I'm not sure if he's included in that picture.
And these pictures are the faces of Americans who are no longer with us due to fentanyl flowing throughout our communities. Now, these are young individuals who are not here today. Now, Noah's not here today. Do you care precisely whether or not fentanyl is coming through ports of entry or between ports of entry, or was your family directly impacted because fentanyl is flooding into our communities one way or the other?
However it gets here, it's here.
And in your experience talking to other family members and talking to law enforcement personnel, is it your observation and belief that the overwhelming flood at our borders, distracting Border Patrol from being able to carry out their duty to stop the flow between the ports of entry or do inspections at the ports of entry, is resulting in more fentanyl pouring into our communities that is then resulting in the death of Americans and, in fact, the death of migrants in the process?
Yes, most of the fathers that I speak with that are not as vocal as the mothers, the common thing they've expressed to me is to come up here and let people know that it's a border issue. It's not an immigration issue. It's flooding across the borders because there's a problem at the borders.
In your communication with families who have lost loved ones due to fentanyl poisonings, do you believe that it is an imperative that this country's federal government, who has a constitutional obligation to secure the border of the United States, do so in order to ensure that we stop the flow of fentanyl and dangerous and illicit narcotics into the United States, resulting in the death of Americans?
Yes.
Do you believe that if this country adopted policies that enabled us to restrict and stop the flow of fentanyl, and that includes ensuring that we have no longer a flood of human beings at our border, while still maintaining asylum laws and protecting people who are being persecuted under actual threat of persecution for their religious and political beliefs, do you believe that stopping the flow of individuals, enabling Border Patrol to stop fentanyl, that is a critical imperative, and if that were adopted, would help save lives like Noah's?
I do, and most others that I talk with feel the same way.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Thank you, Janelle. I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses, and particularly thank you, Mr. Dunn, for being here. And I, too, join my colleagues in expresses our condolences for your unspeakable loss. Mr. Chairman, the House Republican Border Security Plan is one of the most extreme stances this body has seen on immigration in recent history, and that's saying something. It's so extreme that dozens of Republican members oppose it, and some have even called it un-American. The Republican plan would effectively shut down asylum, including families fleeing communism, totalitarian regimes, and unaccompanied children desperately seeking refuge. This is not only a moral failing to asylum seekers fleeing persecution, it also defies existing laws. We have obligations under international agreements and U.S. domestic law to accept and protect asylum seekers. We can't just ignore these obligations because some want to prey on anti-immigrant and xenophobic sentiments to gin up political support. This is sadly an ongoing and blatant attempt by our Republican colleagues to use fear tactics to scare us into turning immigrants away and to demonizing people coming here in search of a better life. We cannot and should not do that. Democrats have put forth proposals that will actually help fix our broken immigration system and secure our borders in a safe and humane way. We've proposed legislation that addresses the root causes of migration, improves border security, and creates additional legal pathways for people to enter the United States. In fact, the 2023 Omnibus Bill, which we passed in December, even included funding to help Customs and Border Patrol stop dangerous cartels, the actual cause of drugs being smuggled into the country, not asylum seekers, by the way, but our House Judiciary Republicans unanimously opposed the bill. So yes, there's a crisis at the border, but it's not the one that the Republican leadership is shouting about. And so, Judge Samaniego, I want to ask you, in your capacity as El Paso County Judge, you meet with many migrants who enter the United States via the El Paso port of entry, and you work very hard to ensure that they're treated with dignity here in the United States. Can you describe what your sense is of why these migrants are entering the U.S., and are they in fact seeking asylum?
I'd like to comment about Border Patrol, and that is, we've been talking about what they have to do, and you're pushing them to do other things. And I can tell you that if we weren't doing our jobs, and I said earlier, we're pushing that back to them, very limited, space is limited, personnel is limited, and we're pushing it back to them. But like I said, we deal a lot, El Paso deals a lot with migrants, and we interact tremendously. We get to see them at shelters, we get to see them at the point of entry, and they're wanting to come here to work, and they're wanting to do something for our country. And I have to stress that we are very, we're very lucky, the things that they want to do, and the things they want to maintain, and the values that they have for the United States. It's just remarkable that under all the circumstances that they go through, they come to our country with tremendous amount of passion to be part of our value system.
And Judge, what kinds of resources do border counties like yours need to ensure that local officials are able to adequately protect public health and safety, while also ensuring that migrants are treated with dignity and processed quickly and efficiently and consistent with our values as the great democracy we are? What more can we do as a federal government to help you do the excellent work that you are doing in El Paso?
The most important thing that we've seen is decompression. That we need the Border Patrol to be able to decompress and allow us to process. And so sometimes, like I said, we're not funded properly. We cannot process properly, and then that's when you have people or buses going into communities that are not ready for them. Obviously, we need shelter. Most of the migrants will move out within 72 hours, and I can tell you that not even 1% of the migrants ever stay in our community, and they're moving to other directions. They've got sponsorships, so we really need that support of being able to have shelter for them so that we can accommodate them. Like I said, 40% already have sponsors and they can move quickly, but the others, it takes us about a day, maybe 72 hours to be able to process them, redirect them. And I can tell you that most of them are going to be U.S. citizens, and if you treat them wrongly, they'll remember that. If you treat them properly and you treat them with respect and humanity and humanitarianism, these are going to be part of our residents, part of our citizens, and this is the first face that they have with our country. And I want to be able for them to keep that excitement, have that respect for America, and you do that by treating them properly. So we need shelter, we need food, and we need to be able to use our strategy. Our strategy works. And I wish that someone would take the time to look at what we do for 4 years now. We've been working on this strategy.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I think this discussion has brought out something that Border Patrol officers told me when I toured the border in the Yuma sector recently. Don't send us more money, they said. They'll only use it to process illegals faster into this country. And I think that the testimony has been bringing that out very clearly today. Since Joe Biden canceled the Remain in Mexico policy and ordered ICE not to enforce court-ordered deportations and abandoned the border wall and signaled to the world that America's borders no longer mattered, we've seen 1.7 million illegal aliens deliberately admitted into this country, and another 1.2 million known gotaways have entered while the Border Patrol's been overwhelmed changing diapers and taking names. Now, that is an illegal alien population of 2.9 million. That is the entire population of the state of Mississippi, just since this administration changed these policies and precipitated this crisis. And as the Democrats' witness testified, illegal aliens are now being rapidly and efficiently trafficked by our government to every community in our nation. What the Democrats have never explained is how our schools are made better by packing classrooms with non-English speaking students, how our hospitals are made more accessible by flooding emergency rooms with illegals demanding care, how our social safety net is strengthened by adding millions of impoverished and dependent individuals to systems that are already strained to the breaking point, how our neighborhoods are made safer by introducing violent cartels into our communities and making it impossible to deport criminal illegal aliens, how our nation's made safer as known terrorists are encountered entering our country in record numbers, how our children are made more secure with fentanyl pouring across our border, or how working families are helped by flooding the labor market with cheap illegal labor. This is the nightmare that the Democrats have unleashed upon our country. I asked the same group of Border Patrol agents in Yuma, what laws could we write that would help them? And they said unanimously, the first thing we need to do is enforce our existing laws. This administration clearly doesn't intend to do so, and the laws that we'll write in the House, I'm afraid, are not going to survive the Democratic Senate or get Joe Biden's signature, so this situation is going to continue to escalate and continue to worsen. It's already being felt intensely in our major cities and rural communities. New York City taxpayers are paying for luxury accommodations to house this flood of illegal aliens there. Fentanyl trafficked across the southwest border killed 71,000 people in America last year alone. In Tulare County, California, a cartel just viciously executed 6 innocent victims. I believe this country is going to soon awaken to a coordinated terrorist attack by elements that have entered through our porous border or with violent cartel wars erupting on our own streets. Our witnesses today tell the story of what their lives are now like in the border communities. But of course, these illegal aliens don't stay in the border communities. They are being trafficked to every community in America. So I'd like to ask Sheriff Daniels what he believes our communities should expect as this mass illegal migration makes its way from his community to ours.
Thank you, Congressman. Let me start off by saying this. I know we're hitting on immigration, and I'm here on border security, but I will say this. You made a comment that they don't stay in our border communities. There is one instance they do stay in our border communities. That's when they die. Over the last 2 years, we have over 1,000 migrants touch U.S. soil coming across our border illegally that have died, that sheriffs, the 31 sheriffs on the border have had to process as homicides until proven otherwise. That's 1,000 migrants under inhumane conditions, smuggled by the criminal cartels that we've left in our border communities and left families in Mexico mourning. So there is a consequence to this open border. Second of all, these sheriffs, these police chiefs, these communities are doing the impact, and I've heard it from Democrats, I've heard it from Republicans. I'll say this to y'all, I didn't drive out here or come out here 2,000 miles with a political agenda. I came out here with a public safety agenda, and that is to protect all people. Well, you got to do that by starting with border security. That's where it starts. Then we got to look at our immigration laws, and I agree with you, Congressman. We have the laws to address it. Legal, and I'll say that. They can come to any port. I can promise you, my 2 international ports in my county, they don't come there. The only time we saw asylum claims on our 2 port of entries was when the cartels were having an internal rift and shot over 40 people we watched it happen from our international line in my county. We had cartel members claim incredible fear that were allowed in our country, that just executed somebody and then come in and claim credible fear because the other side was trying to kill them. So we have a problem on our border. We truly do, but we need you all's help. You all's help to do it, to fix it. Thank you.
My time's expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Mr. Dunn, thank you for coming today, and we all share your love and passion for NOAA and the determination to get something done. And I have a family member, by the grace of God, is alive today after addiction, and also sadly know somebody who has died because of fentanyl. I also believe there's bipartisan support to take on China for its role in exporting fentanyl. And Sheriff Daniels, also thank you for doing a very hard job.
Thank you, Congressman.
Two brothers who are deputy sheriffs, and you've got a very, very tough job, especially just where you are in the world. Would it help your job or hurt your job if you had 20,000 more Border Patrol agents assisting you on the Texas-U.S. border?
Speaking on behalf of, Congressman, on behalf of my brothers and sisters from CBP, I would say that would help.
Yeah, I agree. And we passed legislation in the Senate that would have done that, and I wish we could get a vote on that in the House. I also just want to talk to you. My brothers sometimes are a part of raids. You know, it's a car stop. You take guns and drugs out of the car. You put them on a table. You have a press conference. It's a deterrent to future criminals, and you show and hold up the law enforcement who did that. Sometimes they raid houses on search warrants, and again, they find illegal drugs and guns and paraphernalia. Do you consider those types of raids that your department have done, are those successes or failures when that happens?
They're a little bit of both, I'll say, Congressman.
A failure because the drugs are in the community, but a success because you all caught them.
Yes.
The reason I bring that up is because I think too often many of my colleagues on the other side have rooted on some of the chaos around this issue and don't want to be a part of the solutions or the change. And so recently there have been a number of tweets that my colleagues have posted. One of them from Mr. Gooden. It says, enough fentanyl to kill 140 million Americans was seized at the southern border in June. In honor of Overdose Awareness Week, I'm calling on Joe Biden to close his open border. Then Mr. Buck said, since November, enough fentanyl to kill 2.1 billion people has been seized at the southern border. We must secure the border and protect our children and families. The chairman of the Republican caucus, Ms. Stefanik, said over 800 pounds of fentanyl were seized at our southern border in October. This is Biden's border crisis. And this is just cheering on chaos instead of honoring the police who did the tough job, the hard work, and seized the drugs and took them off the streets. And if we want to talk about some of the fentanyl facts, 96% of the fentanyl seized in the last fiscal year was seized at ports of entry. And 86% of the convictions around fentanyl coming across our border were convictions of U.S. persons. 86%. So we should talk about fentanyl. We should go after China. But this is chaos, what I'm seeing from my Republican colleagues. And when George Bush had successes, rightful successes, stopping the war on terror, I never heard my Republican colleagues say, well, someone was stopped from carrying out a terrorist attack. This is George Bush's terrorism crisis. We should celebrate law enforcement. We should not deride them and use them to make points that actually don't even land because the fentanyl crisis is not happening where you all are claiming it's happening. So I will take this opportunity, and I'll thank Sheriff Daniels and the men and women he works with, and I'll thank CBP for the hard work they do. And I invite my colleagues to join us, not in chaos, but in change. And finally, Mr. Roy's bill that is a part of this hearing would seek to end asylum, an asylum process that has brought to the United States some of the best minds in science, some of the best athletes in the world, some of the best diplomats like Secretary Madeleine Albright. One person recently said, with respect to Mr. Roy's bill and proposal, are we stupid? Come on. This country was based on good minds. Look at Albert Einstein. We gave him a piece of paper to come in. We are letting the Albert Einstein of this modern time slip away. Wasn't a Democrat who said that. It was Mr. Roy's Republican colleague, Representative Maria Elvira Salazar. So I invite my colleagues, listen to your own colleagues who know better on this issue, because it could use a lot more change and solutions and a lot less chaos. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Judge Samaniego.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear about the conflict between the Mexican Army and the Sinaloa cartel in the city of Culiacan in early this month?
I did.
As described in The Guardian, it said that they captured Ovidio Guzman, who's son of El Chapo, prompting a wave of retaliatory attacks from cartel gunmen. After a night of violence, gunmen exchanged fire with security forces, blocking roads with burning vehicles and shooting at Army helicopters and police airplanes, bringing reinforcements to the city. According to one resident, heavy fighting raged for hours after Guzman, a key figure in the Sinaloa cartel since the arrest of his father, was arrested in the city early on Thursday. It goes on to say that residents were locked into their homes. All major roads into the city were blocked with burning vehicles, and gunmen attacked a military air base. It goes on. You would agree that the cartels are dangerous organizations, aren't they?
They are.
And they've come to have extraordinary capacity to operate in Mexico, to the point that they can take on the Mexican army. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure if that's a true statement, but...
Well, in this case, they actually had a running battle with the Mexican army where the helicopter gunships were deployed to fire, and they were firing at them. There was an open warfare in the city. You do understand that, right, sir?
I do understand that.
Do you not see it as possible that in a future with an uncontrolled border, a border we can't control, that those same conditions could exist on the streets of American cities?
I believe that's not the case because I think we're mixing two things. We're mixing one, and that's unrest. We have unrest ourselves here in the United States, just like in Mexico, and we're mixing two things.
Are the cartels strengthened by the fees they receive for trafficking humans across the border?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of assumptions.
Is that a hard question to answer, yes or no?
Well, give me the question straight so I can understand what you said.
My understanding is that billions in income come to the cartels, and according to the Border Patrol officers I've met, they say nobody comes across the Rio Grande. Nobody comes across the border without paying a fee of thousands. And many of these people don't have thousands, so they enter a life of indentured servitude until they pay it off. Their family might be tortured to pay for it. And the cartels earn billions from it. Is that not true?
It's true, but it's true on the Trump era as well.
Okay.
It's not, it has nothing to do
I don't even
with
think it's necessarily should be a battle between Republicans and Democrats about who gets kudos for stopping the flood across the border. But isn't it true that the policy is strengthening the cartels, these dangerous cartels that can operate in the open and conduct open warfare with the Mexican army?
Well, I think you're talking about the root cause, and that's a broken system. And we're having, we have to shoulder a broken system there in our community.
So we just deplore it as a broken system. But we don't need to respond as if this is an emergency and a threat to the United States, that the same conditions could occur here?
I'm not understanding how you're mixing the two things of trying to help asylum seekers. It's part of our
Well, if
our
this
policy.
transnational criminal cartel organizations that exist, and they're capable of doing what they're doing in Mexico, and they're being strengthened day in and day out, and their drug trade is producing profits and expanding their forces in the United States, isn't it just a matter of time and amount before they can do the same thing here that they do there?
We've seen this for 50, 60 years, cartels doing that and the fights that happen between them. We lived that, and we happen to be one of the safest when Mexico was the worst in the world in violence. We were still the safest community in the country.
So you're copacetic about it. You think there's not a threat to the United States?
Well, there's a threat, but I cannot understand what we're here for. Immigration. We're here to discuss what's the right thing to do for immigration. And I've always said that when you mix the two, it gets very complicated. It's complicated enough to look at them separately, much less when you combine the two. When you try to talk about the drugs and try to talk about immigration, it gets so mixed up that you can't resolve it. So I'd like to really focus on the fact that we need to do the best thing that we can. You're very.
I'm out of time. I'd let you go on. I question your conclusion about what's humane and what's not, and with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start off by noting that the chairman of this full Judiciary Committee lawfully defied a bipartisan congressional subpoena. Now, Mr. Dunn, thank you for coming here today. Sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing your story and your efforts on working on the fentanyl issue. Judge Salmon, where you go. I have some questions for you about fentanyl. I agree with my Republican and Democratic colleagues that we need to tackle this issue. It's your experience, isn't it, that the overwhelming majority of fentanyl seizures occur at ports of entry and not from migrants bringing them across the borders. Is that right?
That's correct. That's what we understand. That's what we know. We work so close with law enforcement, Border Patrol, ICE, and we do not get that suggestion that it's the migrants. And we talk directly to them. It's not the migrants that have that issue. It's at the port of entry by Americans, by the way, that are crossing into the United States more so than any other form that comes through our borders.
And in fact, your experience is actually what the data shows. So I have an article here from the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. The title of it is Fentanyl is Smuggled for U.S. Citizens by U.S. Citizens. And what the facts from this article show are that in 2021, U.S. citizens were 86.3% of the convicted fentanyl traffickers. In addition, over 90% of fentanyl seizures occur at legal crossing points or interior vehicle checkpoints. So if we really want to tackle the bulk of this issue, what we want to do is strengthen technology at legal points of entry, at the ports of entry. We want to give Border Patrol more resources at these ports of entry to address the fentanyl seizures. And thank you to all the Border Patrol agents that the Republicans have highlighted repeatedly for how much they've been seizing in fentanyl because they're doing their job. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter this article from the Cato Institute titled, Fentanyl is Smuggled for U.S. Citizens by U.S. Citizens, Not by Asylum Seekers.
Without objection.
So Sheriff Danos, thank you for your public service.
Thank you, Congressman.
Do you know which American president said, for decades, the United States has not been in complete control of its borders?
No.
That president was George W. Bush in 2006. Are you familiar with Operation Intercept at all?
I'm not.
Okay. That was an operation put in by an American president that basically shut down the southern border for about 3 weeks. And then it was lifted because it was not sustainable. That American president was Richard Nixon. This hearing is titled Biden's Border Crisis. That is completely wrong. It is not Biden's border crisis. This has been a crisis for over half a century, from Nixon and every American president after him. They have not addressed this issue. I'm going to read you some comments from various American presidents. 80 to 90% of the heroin that comes into the U.S. today comes across our southern border. You know who said that? President Ford said that. Millions of undocumented aliens have illegally immigrated to the U.S. They have breached our nation's immigration laws, displaced many American citizens from jobs, and placed increased financial burden on many states and local governments. President Carter said that. The ongoing migration of persons to the United States in violation of our laws is a serious national problem. President Reagan said that. I was especially concerned about the growing problems of alien smuggling and international terrorists hiding behind immigrant status. President Clinton said that. I could go on and on. The only folks that can actually fix this problem is the United States Congress by passing laws. And we had a chance to do that with a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill that passed the US Senate on a bipartisan basis. And guess who stopped it? House Republicans. So it is simply a false narrative that this is Biden's border crisis. It is a crisis of over half a century, and the people that can stop it are we in Congress. I urge Republicans, instead of doing hearings and doing talking points, to actually work with Democrats on a comprehensive immigration bill that will, in fact, solve this problem. And with that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman, Mr. Daniels, with respect to that previous point. There's been about 4.7 million apprehensions under the current administration. Is that unprecedented in your eyes?
Yes.
2.7 million people have been released into the United States. Is that unprecedented, in fact, way off the charts compared to past numbers?
Yes.
The extent to which fentanyl is pouring into our communities, is that precedented?
Yes.
Or is it precedented? It's unprecedented, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
I would ask the Judge Samaniego, you testified that there's no invasion. There were 162,000 encounters in the El Paso sector alone in the first quarter of this fiscal year. Does that sound correct? According to Border Patrol numbers. 55,000 in December alone. Is that correct? We had the Democrat mayor of El Paso who has been busing people to New York City. Truth?
Nope.
The Democrat mayor of El Paso has not been putting people on buses, sending them to New York City.
Not without notification at the other end.
Okay, but they're putting them on buses and sending them to New York City. And New York City today is asking the federal government for money to process individuals that they're dealing with overflowing in New York City. Now, you testified earlier that you weren't getting help from the state of Texas. Now, the city of El Paso declared emergency, but has the county declared emergency?
No.
No, the county has not declared emergency.
No, we did not.
The earlier testimony that you had before, you testified that this effort to want to secure the border is racist. So here's a question for you. 50% of Border Patrol are Hispanic. Border Patrol overwhelmingly wants us to change policies to secure the border. Not just as some are testifying that we need more resources. I know that Mr. Daniels, Sheriff Daniels, testified that having 20,000 additional agents would be helpful. The answer to that is, of course. Of course having more personnel would be helpful. But the question is what do they most want? Mr. Daniels, what does Border Patrol most want to secure the border? Do they want policy changes to actually enforce the law, or do they want more resources? Which would they rank higher?
Policy changes.
What kind of policy changes? Enforcing the laws of the United States at the border?
Enforce the rule of law, and I'll share this add-on too, support from, they feel like they're not being supported by this administration.
If we had a law that said that we should follow current law to detain individuals claiming asylum for the pendency of the adjudication of that claim, to require that they be detained according to current law, would that be banning asylum?
No.
And if people are claiming in this committee that it is banning asylum, would that be untrue?
Yes.
Hector Garza works in Laredo, Texas for Border Patrol. He's a friend. He is Hispanic. He said, the mother of all caravans isn't just materializing out of the ether, it's just the most recent wave of an invasion that is being aided and abetted by liberal activists who believe that subverting United States law is the best way to achieve their radical policy objectives. Mr. Daniels, do you believe that Hispanic Border Patrol agent Hector Garza is racist by describing what we're experiencing at the border as an invasion and suggesting that it is in fact the policies of liberal activists represented by my Democratic colleagues in this committee and in this House, that is what is subverting United States law? Do you believe that is racist?
No.
Judge Samaniego, do you believe that there, in light of your statement saying that these policies that are being promoted to secure the border, that you think that Border Patrol agent Hector Garza, a lifelong public servant working for the Border Patrol in Laredo, Texas, and Hispanic, a Texan. It's racist for that Hispanic American to say that it is an invasion, that his Border Patrol personnel are overwhelmed, that he believes that it is the liberal policies that are making a mockery of our current laws to say that we should enforce the laws, that we should enforce the laws on the books, that is in fact a racist statement by Hispanic Border Patrol agent Hector Garza.
Well, it's a freedom of speech, and he can say whatever he needs to say. I can tell you that if you ask the Border Patrol in El Paso, they're looking for assistance, that we do not detain them because they don't have the space, they don't have the personnel.
I appreciate that, but I would just suggest to you is that that is not a racist statement to say that we should think we should secure the border. This chart, Mr. Daniels, can you see it from there? Can you see the uptick in the numbers here, way up here?
Yes.
That chart reflects the uptick in migrant deaths. That's 2020 to 2022. Almost 1,000 migrant deaths at the southwest border of the United States. We had 53 migrants die in a tractor trailer in San Antonio, cooked in the Texas heat. 57 were killed when a tractor trailer crammed with migrants rolled over the highway, crashing in Mexico's southern state of Chiapas. Ask me this, is it Christian for migrants to be treated like that and to die in tractor trailers? Would anybody at this panel think it's Christian? Mr. Dunn, you go to church in Hays County. Is it Christian to allow migrants to die like that?
This
No.
time has expired.
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you. Before I call on you, I have a few articles that I want to read into the record. El Paso forced to bus immigrants out of town amid mass migration, from the New York Post. El Paso joins Governor Greg Abbott in busing migrants to New York City, from Texas Tribune. And El Paso looks like a third world country after Texas border city, from the New York Post. Without objection, recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses, all of you, for being here. Mr. Dunn, I want to join my colleagues in expressing my condolences to you and your wife, Janelle, and your family for your profound loss of Noah. For 4 years, Donald Trump pursued some of the most inhumane immigration policies as president. He cruelly tore thousands of children from their parents and did everything in his power to dismantle any parts of the U.S. legal immigration system and refugee resettlement system, a system that has been called the crown jewel of American humanitarianism, not by liberal radicals, but actually by the Association of Evangelicals. Today, my colleagues across the aisle want to go even further than Donald Trump, with policies that would effectively end asylum and place unaccompanied children in Remain in Mexico-type proceedings. Not even Donald Trump went that far. But don't take my word for how extreme this is. Even other Republicans have said that these proposals go too far, calling them extreme, and again, not liberal radicals calling them extreme, or calling them anti-American. That was from another Republican, other Republicans in this Congress. In fact, one Texas Republican said, and I quote, "Border security and immigration are two separate topics. One can be for a strong border security presence that prevents terrorists, fentanyls, and bad actors from entering our country, and one can be for welcoming future Americans in through the front door." So here are some facts. Since Congress created the Department of Homeland Security in 2003, we have spent over $350 billion on the agencies that enforce immigration law. Federal immigration spending has surpassed what was promised in multiple immigration bills that would have reformed the actual system so that there are legal pathways for people to come to this country. But we know that throwing money at the border without also fixing the legal immigration system is not going to be successful. We have passed, in December of 2022, Democrats passed the fiscal year 2023 omnibus, which included $60 million to hire additional CBP officers and support personnel at ports of entry, and another $70 million to strengthen non-intrusive inspection systems that scan vehicles and cargo to disrupt the flow of drugs, including fentanyl, at ports of entry. Not one of my Republican colleagues voted for that legislation. In June of 2020, Congress passed the infrastructure bill, which included $430 million to modernize our ports of entry and improve CBP's ability to detect illicit drugs. 200 House Republicans voted against it. We put that money in because we know that over 90% of fentanyl is seized at ports of entry. Now, I understand that the issues that we are talking about today require my Republican colleagues to tell a lot of statements that aren't true, to use nativist rhetoric, words like invasion and flooding that have actually been used throughout the history of this country to demonize immigrants to this country, different waves of immigrants that have come into this country, but that is not the way that we are going to solve this problem. Judge Samaniego, I want to thank you for your service and also for sending us the wonderful Congresswoman Escobar, who is such an important voice here on this committee and in this Congress. I want to call your attention to this chart that shows that when the Biden administration rolled out a clear process for Haitians to seek admission into the United States in June through August of 2021, and then again beginning in April of 2022, the number of Haitians presenting themselves at ports of entry increased. In fact, as we maintained that clear legal process for Haitians, people coming outside of the process basically ended. In your experience, meeting with people seeking safety, do you hear a persistent desire to follow a legal process to enter the United States?
Absolutely. I've seen some incredible situations where they're waiting in Juarez under very difficult circumstances. And sometimes the only reason they cross is because it gets so difficult for them. So they really are interested in doing the right thing. And I'm glad you mentioned the separation of children. There's nothing more heartbreaking. And I want to give credit to our Congresswoman who's really stepped up. So sometimes it doesn't take a law, it just takes a person in El Paso and everywhere else. No longer is a separation of children because she found it to be offensive. She stood up for it, she's championed for that. And we no longer do that. And I think that's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. My time is yielded. I do ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to enter the following statements into the record. The American Immigration Lawyers Association, Church World Services, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, First Focus Campaign for Children, Human Rights First, Kids in Need of Defense, National Immigration Law Center, National Immigration Project, Project on Government Oversight, and the Southern Border Communities Coalition.
Without objection. I recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Bartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Samaniego, do you believe in the rule of law?
Pardon me?
Do you believe in the rule of law?
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a question. You were talking about asylum seekers. How many of them are actually legitimate asylum seekers, cases percentage-wise, based on the current law?
I think that's an impossible question because they have the right to say that they have credible fear, and it's not my position or my role to determine whether that's true or not, but that's the court.
Well, the cases, when you go and look at these cases, what is the percentage of them actually legitimate? What do you assess? That is actually was not abuse?
From the stories I've heard and what they go through and how they're persecuted in their countries and how, you know, how they're treated, and it's not economically driven as much as it's fear driven.
So what is the percentages actually that could be legitimate? You know, when I was in Texas, you know, a few years ago, and I talked to some people there, I actually been in El Paso too, it was under 10%. I'm not sure if this number changed now, but would you say that majority of them are not?
Well, I mean, you're asking for a non-objective. I mean, I can't.
Okay, then let me question. If there are a lot of illegitimate cases, do you think it hurts legitimate asylum seekers that actually can be killed by their government?
Well, absolutely. I mean, they're seeking to get away from their difficult situation, but I cannot tell you. That's up to the court.
So do you believe that, you know, and I agree with you that it shouldn't be where the court really should be doing it because we're delaying the process, you know, and do you believe that have such a large number of people at the border doesn't allow us actually to help legitimate people that could be dead? Because we have some people that Very desperate people, don't get me wrong. Life is tough in a lot of countries. There are a lot of things, that is real bad. But we have people really in a life and death situation. Do believe to have such a scale of people coming to the border and maybe abusing the system and cartel take advantage of some of these people actually hurts legitimate people.
Well, that's the broken system. I mean, we're asking, the system says you have the right to express credible fear.
But the system should be checked at the border and should be go in the first port of entry. So there is a lot of abuses of the system. Do you believe we then need to tighten a little bit asylum procedures from our standpoint, that Border Patrol can do a better job, that we don't have to wait for a lot of cases that when they get to the court system? Do you think it's illegitimate?
I can tell you that the number of times that a migrant is vetted is unbelievable.
But they're not vetting for credible fear right now because they're so overwhelmed that they just say, I have a credible fear. Cartel gives you a piece of paper, say what you say the right thing to do, and they just let you go. And hopefully they give notice to appear. Some of them don't even give them anymore because they cannot process it. It's becoming a situation where it's becoming, no one can handle this amount. So do you believe we need to improve that from your perspective, that it's not enforcement issue, that enforcement law needs to be tightened? Is that?
Absolutely, it needs to be improved, but I think you're not giving us a solution. It's not an easy solution for us to determine whether it is or it isn't credible fear, because the law says that if you express it, then we have to accept it.
Well, at least we agree something the law maybe need to be tightened because we're really hurting the people. Do you believe that cartels making so much money on desperate poor people that the message spread, they all come to the country, is really hurts legal immigration, but also it's really creating modern day slavery because these are desperate people. Do you believe that would be characterized like that?
Well, what I've said over and over again is that if you stop the process, you help the cartels. When the process is moving, it's very difficult for them to do the things that they do. When you push them back to
You don't think all this money actually are helping them to empower them and control now almost the whole border with a lot of money, have better resources than our Border Patrol has? You don't believe it helping them because all of these people pay them a lot of money and from desperate countries. They don't make enough money to pay unless they become enslaved by these people.
I agree, but every time that the process stops, that's when they get abused, they get raped, and so there's people that legitimately can come into our country if we can help them process and get them quickly moving, less likely with a cartel.
And I think we need to work on that. Maybe we can at least find common ground on that. And what would you say, Sheriff, from your experience, what really needs to be done? And we have like a few seconds left to really find common ground to stop this insanity.
I'll talk fast. I actually spoke with Secretary Mayorkas about putting judicial oversight at the southern border so they can address these asylum claims, these credible fear claims. As we know, the high percentage don't qualify under law to do that. Secretary Mayorkas stated, I 100%, that's a quote, I 100% agree with you, Sheriff, but we've seen no action over last year to get that done because we could address it at the border, not within our communities.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you.
I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Dunn, I also want to convey my condolences at your loss of your son, Noah. I'm a father of 4, and every day I pray for my children. I'm also a Little League dad, and I've seen young children go from promising athletes to drug rehab. Terrible situation. Drug abuse, the scourge in our society, does not discriminate. Working hard to make sure nobody falls victim to the scourge. And Sheriff Daniels, I also want to thank you for your good work.
Thank you, sir.
I have a brother that served the LAPD for 30 years.
Thank you for your service.
He's got some interesting stories.
Yeah, I bet you do.
You mentioned human trafficking. You mentioned $3,000. Is that the price to smuggle a human being to this country?
No, it's $7,000 and up to be smuggled by the criminal cartels. For the drivers that are coming to my county, going to 3 hours north to Phoenix, Maricopa County, it's $3,000 per person.
I just got back from Central America, and the going price now is about $22,000. And most of the women, 80% of the women, by the time they get to El Paso, to our southern border, are either raped or sexually abused. Yes. And I would say that that's a lot of desperation, putting yourself at risk. A woman preparing herself for that eventuality and paying $22,000.
I would agree.
You know, like many of us here, I've had the opportunity to go to the southern border, El Paso, San Isidro, Canadian border as well. My job in Homeland Security. Only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to talk about the San Isidro border crossing. When I usually cross that border, come back to the U.S., I identify myself to the border agents, tell them who I am, ask them how's the day work going, and usually get average answers. One day, agent told me, look behind you. See all those cars? I said, yes. He says, they are essentially filled with Russian and Ukrainian undocumented immigrants. I said, it's new? They said, no, it's been happening for a few months now. Well, the Russian-Ukrainian war started. Those undocumented Ukrainians are now Ukrainian refugees. April of 2022, less than a year ago, I went back to San Isidro, actually to Tijuana, Mexico, to visit a refugee camp of Ukrainians. This is what I found behind me. Mexican government took a baseball field, turned it into a refugee camp. The Mexican police were guarding that camp to make sure those refugees were safe. American private and public donations poured in. Doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals came in from across the country to make sure healthcare needs were taken care of. This became a processing center for Ukrainian refugee camps. Refugees would come in 24 to 48 hours. They would board a bus, be driven to the pedestrian West Crossing. Title 42 would be waived. They would get a parole status and walk across the border. This is an example of how you deal with a refugee crisis right here, ladies and gentlemen. This doesn't look like El Paso. This is the way you address the refugee challenge. The Biden administration, thankfully, is now working on implementing a similar program, parole program for Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans. But we still have the Afghanis that fought alongside our troops that are still hanging out there somewhere. Same thing for Syrians. And Sheriff Daniels, I ask you those questions because it's an issue of incentives, folks. Very, very desperate individuals, you got to give them a reason to go through the legal process because they are desperate. And the refugee challenge is not just the United States. It's a worldwide issue. And the solution isn't just here. Our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, have to be part of the solution as well. Under existing laws, this is the way you do it. I'm out of time. Chairman, I yield. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Dunn, our prayers are with you and your family for the loss of your son. This hearing is designed to bring to Washington the concerns of the people at the border about this border crisis and seek out its origins, which are clearly down at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. From day one, this administration has blatantly ignored U.S. immigration laws and policies designed to keep America safe. And after several visits to the border myself, it's clear we need border enforcement now. The open border and amnesty policies have made this crisis worse every single day. It encourages more vulnerable populations to make what is a very dangerous journey. Americans should be outraged by the Biden administration's failed leadership. On January 30th, KFOX 14 in El Paso reported on Border Patrol reports in the article entitled Unprecedented Number of Migrants Reported in El Paso in the First Quarter of 2023. More than 64% of the migrants encountered during this time frame were single adults, some attempting to evade arrest and not seeking asylum. Unaccompanied children encounters increased by 59% in the last fiscal year of 2022, the same time frame, as opposed to 8,000 unaccompanied children encounters. El Paso sector recorded only 5,000, so that's up The sector led the nation in the first quarter of the fiscal year with total migrant encounters across all 20 U.S. Border Patrol sectors. Agents apprehended 37 individuals with criminal records, rescued 61 migrants, including tender-age children, some abandoned in the remote desert, and intercepted 22 narcotics loads. A defense attorney in El Paso, a juvenile defense attorney, stated youth are getting more involved with crime, huge increases in weapons, and he thinks it's just because they're getting money to pay for these weapons, and how they're earning that money is from drugs. I see a lot of kids are helping the human smuggling, and that's a big problem. Although, Judge, you stated in your testimony there's no invasion of migrants in our community, nor are there hordes of undocumented immigrants. Crimes against citizens are causing havoc in our community. When you see an increase in children helping human smuggling, how is that not the case? How is it not the case that these policies are contributing to the delinquency of minors in your area?
And once again, I don't see the correlation of things that are going wrong with our country and sort of saying that it's influenced by our immigration or people coming through. Like I said, we don't see that. We try our best to deal with the circumstances at hand, and then we try our best to move people along. And I've said over and over, you know, you guys have the luxury of being Democrats and Republicans. We have to be public servants, and that's all we can do. When they come across, we do not manage who comes across. We manage how to process them in the most possible, you know, the best possible way. And I've said over and over, El Paso really thinks as a nation. You know, I think people think that we just focus on our situation there at the community, but we don't. We're really concerned about having New York having to deal with that, having Chicago deal with that. We've talked to each one of the mayors, and we're working. I think if we were to put in more of a national system of allowing communities to say who needs the migrants, and then helping us to process them there, and I use the Houston model, is just exceptional. Every single day, 52 come in, they go back to Houston, they go to the bigger hubs, and we move them through. And so that's where we need your help. We need your help, not to whether or not what we're doing is right or inaccurate, but the fact that it's a community that really shoulders a tremendous amount of a broken system.
Well, and you say that the transportation of these individuals to other cities is necessary to prevent your community from descent into chaos, correct?
No, that's not true.
So you're fine keeping them all in your jurisdiction instead of sending them to other locations?
We would welcome them, but it's a shame that they're concerned about being close to the border because of how they're going to be treated and how they're going to be deported, even if they shouldn't be deported. So you've got migrants wanting to move into the interiors simply because they don't feel safe. Even if they're here processed and legal. Once they're processed, they're legal in our community. And so, once again, I think we're helping the nation do the right thing.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to have called this hearing to really promote fear-mongering or disinformation in order to justify a radical plan that would effectively shut down asylum to everyone. And the plan is so extreme that their Republican colleagues have objected that it's ineffective, inhumane, and even un-American. And what I find particularly pernicious is the attempt to conflate the issues of migrants seeking legal asylum through our legal processes with the very real scourge of fentanyl trafficking, which, as CBP data demonstrates and Judge Samaniego has testified, overwhelmingly comes through the ports of entry in trucks and cargo ships, not on the backs of migrants trying to flee poverty or violence in their home countries. By falsely suggesting that migrant families seeking asylum are the source of the fentanyl epidemic, we can't even start to craft policy measures that could actually address either of these issues, the fentanyl crisis or the humanitarian issues raised by the push factors in South and Central America and our immigration laws. So I don't want to waste this opportunity, and since most of my experience before coming to Congress has to do with how badly broken our immigration laws are, I just wanted to focus there. How do we handle the increase in asylum seekers at the southern border with real fixes like some of those that Judge Samaniego has suggested? As I suggested, we do need to address the root causes of migration, but we need to have functioning pathways here in this country that people can pursue. I mean, I've represented enough folks seeking asylum to know that there aren't functional pathways. I think we heard a statistic that only a small percentage of people seeking asylum are actually entitled to it. That's not true. The statistics vary very widely across the country, but in some areas, particularly on the border where there are less friendly judges often, the rates are very, very different than in other areas across the country. So Judge Samaniego, you are not an immigration judge, are you? You don't adjudicate asylum claims.
We do not.
Okay, I did want to clarify that. Now, a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the border and speak with Customs and Border Patrol, Homeland Security agents, and advocates, and did see that there is a humane processing process available there. And I really appreciate that. Why do you think that's been so successful over the years, particularly when compared with other cities and counties along the border?
I think one is that we've accepted to be humanitarian, and when you do not start at that point, then you don't create processes, you don't create ways to handle them, the NGOs are not working with you, the Border Patrol doesn't work with you. So I think the moment that you make that determination that you're gonna be humanitarian, it forces you to come up with systems to help out. And there are some, for example, there's things that we could do. The Venezuelan population dropped tremendously as soon as the Border Patrol has an app that you can now, from your country, you can begin to apply. And we're talking about vetting the credible fear. So you're able to do a little bit of that, and the numbers drop tremendously. I think also I was able to talk to the ambassador from the U.S. to Mexico, and he talked about what do we do at the origin. The point of origin is very important because we know that, for example, why is Colombia not treating Venezuelans properly, and then Venezuelans have to leave their country to come to our country? And so it's not just a pull that we have a push that we need to look at as well. And so, I think if we get creative, but I think once you start with the idea that you have to, it's safety, that we have to make sure that the economy is taken care of. El Paso was one of the strongest economies in all of Texas. We were one of the strongest. And so while we're dealing with the situation, we have to worry about the economy. So the economy, the safety, and being able to do the right things from a humanitarian. I think if you start from that premise, I think things are more solvable. If you start from the premise that you don't want them here, then what's the solution?
Well, and I do want to pick up on that because over the past few months, Texas's governor has sent dozens of busloads of vulnerable migrants to Philadelphia, which I represent, without notice or coordination, which of course has made it more difficult for our willing city authorities to welcome those folks. But when you have 2 buses dumped on New Year's Eve morning before 6 o'clock and you have vulnerable people without coats, it's very difficult. So I appreciate your insight that cooperation can smooth over many of the issues that we're dealing with. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Judge Samaniego, you said in one of your answers earlier that people come here because they're passionate, and you've advocated for allowing people to come in here. Do you think that's a reason why we should allow people into America on a legal basis because they're passionate to come to America?
Well, no. I said they were here for different reasons. They just happen to be passionate as an additional component. I mean, they come because they're fearing what's happening in their community. I've talked to, like I said earlier, when they tell you that every day their mom or their dad calls them and says they come here looking for you every morning and they want to know where you're at, that's why they're moving in this direction.
Thank you. I'm really glad this issue in regards to Governor Abbott moving people to various cities around the country has come up. Have you been critical of Governor Abbott for what he's done?
Absolutely, because when you send someone that's not organized and they don't know who's on that bus, and some of them are not sponsored. That's a huge burden on that community.
Have you been critical of the Biden administration when they've flown people all over the country in the dark of night?
I don't know of that taking place. I apologize.
So you have not seen, for example, I have an article here entitled "Biden Administration Quietly Flies Illegal Immigrants to New York in Middle of Night," and we just heard from a fellow member on this panel saying they're doing it in Philadelphia also. Do you think that's right for the Biden administration to do that?
Well, I think it's an indication of that they have to decompress, because when we get flights that are going out, it's to decompress the system there with the Border Patrol and has nothing to do with our community.
So did you give the benefit of the doubt to Governor Abbott and say, well, maybe they're decompressing these people on their trips to these cities?
Well,
I mean, isn't it the same thing, Judge Samaniego?
No, it isn't, because it's not coordinated. We've never gotten a call from the governor to tell us, hey, what do you need? How can we help? How can we do things?
No,
and we just get buses.
I
to
really
leave.
appreciate that. Biden administration quietly flies illegal immigrants to New York in the middle of the night. That's what they're doing. We'll be happy to share this article with you so you can see what's happening there. Thank you for your answer. Sheriff Daniels, I was in your county in June of 2020. What's changed since June of 2020?
Well, we went from, just to put it in perspective, around 5% of my jail population was border-related, up to almost 45% now, 45%. We've seen the pursuits. Last year, we put 180 people in jail for pursuits that were deadly pursuits. When I say deadly, driving at 100 miles an hour plus, endangering communities. Some resulted in deaths. Some we interdicted before they killed somebody. We see the flow of public safety challenges in our community based on this border every day. So it's changed drastically as a result of this border.
Because what I heard from you sheriffs is that there was good coordination all the way from the local level, all the way up to the federal government, June of 2020. And that there was some control the border was becoming more secure. Is that generally an accurate statement?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, Border Patrol, when I pull up to the scene to help my deputies, the troopers, officers, or agents, they always make a point to come over and say, Sheriff, thank you for what you do. Thanks for being a voice for us.
We heard earlier that, I can't remember who it was that said that the increased fentanyl is not tied to illegal border crossings. Do you agree with that statement?
No.
And why not?
The criminal cartels are exploiting our border, whether they're trafficking children, adults, males, females, whether they're human smuggling for profit, or they're doing illicit drugs. Either way, the criminal cartels are exploiting a border, and I keep hearing the different words about how it's controlled. It's not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels are they're the winners of this.
Those of you on the other side of the aisle, you can continue to wear blinders, or you can do photo op trips like the president did down to El Paso, where they clean up that region before he comes in. You can do that. But the American people are seeing very clearly what's going on. And now that we're in the majority, we're going to try to identify this as much as possible, because you're hearing the truth here from people like the sheriff, from the fentanyl families. And I hope you're meeting with those fentanyl families, because it's directly tied to the border. I want to just close with this. I hope as we go through this process, we also get more information out in regards to the NGOs, the International Organization for Migration, which has weaponized immigration into this country all the way from Panama up to the southern border. I hope we dig in deep to those NGOs that are complicit in the greatest human trafficking operation perhaps in the history of the world. I yield back.
Chair recognizes gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Is that right, Ms. Dean?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our testifiers for being here today. We benefit from your experience and your service and your knowledge and your heartbreaking family experience. You know, before I ran for Congress, I was a professor. For 10 years, I taught at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, teaching writing and rhetoric and ethics. And that's why I can't help noticing the words so often used by my Republican colleagues when we're talking about both of these tragic issues. Words like hordes, invasion, crisis, open border. It's purposeful. They want the American people to be scared. They want us to feel threatened. They want to create divisions because othering people makes it far easier to mistreat them. The reality is there is no invasion. There are no hordes of invaders. Our borders are not being overrun by dangerous criminals. But we do have a broken immigration system. At the same time, we are suffering with an extraordinary, deadly drug problem in our country. Mr. Dunn and Mrs. Dunn, Ms. Janelle, my extraordinary, heartfelt sympathy to you on the loss of dear Noah, poisoned by fentanyl, as you have written here in your testimony. My family knows a little bit about drugs and poisoning, but from a different perspective, my son is a recovering addict. And it is by the grace of God that he did not run into the deadly fentanyl that would have taken his life. But we must be able to talk about these things honestly and not conflate them, as my colleague just said. There's a difference between the facts and the rhetoric, between wanting to solve these problems or just trying to make people afraid of them. The fact is, 90% of fentanyl, heroin, and meth seized in this country is captured at ports of entries. Just about everybody who has spoken to has said this. This means that drugs are being brought in through normal channels, not on the backs of families crossing at remote parts of the country. The vast majority I'm talking about. I'm sure it's not 100%. In fact, CBP reports that drug cartels are now recruiting Americans to bring fentanyl into this country, not undocumented immigrants. And we have a horrific problem. Like your dear Noah, we are losing more than 100,000 people a year to overdose. More than 70% of those fentanyl. I wear this band for the son, a 24-year-old son who died of an overdose, fentanyl poisoning. And sadly, it's not one anymore. This band now represents at least a half a dozen in my community whose children have lost their lives. But let's get serious about it. Let's stop demonizing the immigrant who comes and asks for help. Judge Samaniego, I understand, and I have been to El Paso, to the port of entry. It's the second busiest border crossing in the United States. You interact with a large number of these people who are, and they're people seeking safety and humane treatment. Can you tell us just a couple snippets of why they are coming across?
And I said earlier, a large number that you hear is that they were in their country, they were abused, they try to defend themselves, and they get targeted. That's one big category, where they're just trying to do the right thing in their own country, but their own country rejects them, and then they target them. That's a big part of it. And a lot of it, like I said, is just, it's not, the economy plays a second part of it. Obviously, the economy is worse, and that's not a reason to come to our country because of the economy. But they're really driven by the fact that they can no longer live in their communities.
And we know that we've seen these numbers for a large number of years, not just under the Biden administration. I think in your testimony you wrote at least the last 4 years you've had increased numbers.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to what you also said in your testimony, which is this, what I'm so concerned about, which is the false racist narrative that is being promoted here today and is promoted day after day here in Congress?
Well, you know, if anybody's concerned with that, it's us. I mean, that narrative was picked up by a shooter that, you know, at the Walmart situation, and we hear that, and it concerns us as a community when you say racism and invasion and all of these things. It makes our community extremely nervous because then we might get targeted for being that community and for being humanitarian. And so I do ask, you know, for this words to be settled in a different way. You know, you don't need to say invasion and, you know, all of these things that are happening across the border. We're a community that works really hard. You know, we're very privileged with what we have, and it's just very concerning when we hear this because we don't know if we're going to be targeted because of these comments.
And I know my time is up. I thank all three of you for your service. And Mr. Dunn, I thank you for your wish to educate people about the extraordinary dangers to our children.
The gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Mr. Dunn, as everybody else has said, and I know we've been repetitive, but it really is heartfelt. We feel for you as somebody who, I'm a grandfather, I am getting older, and a father, and I can't imagine. I cannot imagine, and I will tell you, and I mean this sincerely, that I will pray for you and for your family. I don't know, sometimes I think the world's upside down, and the more that time goes on, especially recently, it seems upside down to me. So I have to talk about a few of the things that I heard my colleagues on the other side say, that, for example, this hearing was a show. The hearing's not a show. In order to determine how to effectively fix something, you have to study it, you have to learn about it, and you have to hear about it. And that's what this hearing's about. It's not a show, and it's also not anti-immigration. None of these Republicans, and I'm sure none of the Democrats, are anti-immigration, but we are anti-illegal immigration. There is a difference. There is the rule of law. I don't know where we've lost that, and that's what I mean by the world being upside down. The rule of law, that you follow laws and things happen in a certain way. And the other secret here that people sometimes don't want to talk about is no country that's ultimately successful for a long period of time has wide open borders. Yes, there can be border problems. America's had border problems. Many countries have had border problems. But nevertheless, you can't say that you can just have completely open borders. If that's true, let's just open our country completely to every single country in the world and say we have no borders, and as many people want to come here can come here, whether they're sick or not, whether they have other issues or not, whether drugs are coming in or not. And yes, drugs are coming in because the cartels are helping these people to get across and using them. And human trafficking is happening, and human abuse is happening. I'm sorry, Judge, but it is. And if you talk to people down there, I know the people you talk to don't see it and hear it, but the people that I do, and we're going to go again real soon, do see it and hear it. It's true. It's real. And you know, I kind of empathized with the Sheriff Daniels, when you spoke about Secretary Mayorkas, because I've had the opportunity to ask him questions a number of times when I was on the Homeland Security Committee, and the guy doesn't tell the truth. Nobody wants to say that openly, but I will. The guy's a liar. He does not tell the truth. And when he tells you he's going to look at something, he doesn't. When he tells you he's going to do something, he doesn't. When you show him a video of terrible things happening, once it was a video of a young officer actually saving somebody's life that was drowning, and they found out that it was a drug dealer whose life he saved. By the way, the officer died. That's the truth. The truth is we have a problem. And the truth is that we need borders that are effective, and we need borders that are sealed. And the truth is, it is Biden's. I'll be the partisan one here. It is Biden's problem, because in 2 years it's radically changed. When President Trump put together a strong array of immigration policies at stemming the flow of illegal immigrant crossings, there was so much of a reduction. It was so much safer. It was getting better. It was working. And you know what? Legal immigrants don't like the illegal immigration. They don't want to be mixed into that. In his very first day in office, President Biden decimated this process. He ignored the experts. He ignored the expert advice of those serving at the borders. He turned his back on the millions of Americans that live in border communities. Does anybody care about all these people that are being overrun? Well, we're all going to care soon, because we're all going to be overrun. And that's not hyperbole. It's not extreme. They're being shipped all over the country. He ended the construction of the wall. He refused to deport any illegal immigrants for the first 100 days, so he terminated the declaration of a national emergency at the southern border, all in one single day. Did we put out a message that we wanted illegal immigration? Absolutely. And you know all the things that have happened since, and how many gotaways have got away. But I wanted to ask something to the sheriff, because I don't have time. I'd love to talk on this longer. Kamala Harris was appointed the border czar. So that means she should know this border in and out and in every way, along with Mayorkas. Has she? Have you had a lot of interaction with her? I'm done talking, but can he answer that at least?
Yes, gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
No.
No. I hope everybody heard that. That's the answer. That's the truth.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also join my colleagues, Mr. Dunn, in expressing my heartfelt sympathies and condolences for the loss of your son. Sheriff Daniels, thank you for your service to your community and to our country. And again, Judge Samaniego, I'm so grateful for your compassionate and strategic leadership and your partnership with the federal government. Really appreciate your testimony here as well. You know, for anyone who really, truly wants to understand what's happening at the border and to depoliticize this, we've got to take a step back and acknowledge that what we have been seeing is an historic refugee crisis impacting our Western Hemisphere. And it started in 2014 as we began seeing record numbers of unaccompanied minors, and it has continued through the years. When folks credit Donald Trump for limiting migration, I want you to look at what the data shows, which is the only time we saw a drop during the Trump administration was in the weeks after the country and the world shut down because of COVID. And the apprehensions began increasing again before the November general election in 2020. So let's operate in truth and facts, or we won't be able to achieve any solutions together. And I'll tell you, there's no one who wants a safe, secure, well-managed border than those of us who live and work on the border, than those of us who raise our children on the border, those of us who have pledged our service to the border. So to my Republican colleagues, I will work with anyone who wants to achieve what I hope we all want to achieve. And so how do we do that? How do we solve this challenge? I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't keep doing more and more of the same. The definition of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is insanity. What have we been doing for decades in America? We've been addressing immigration as a border-only issue, and that is an expensive failure. So how do we solve this? Number one, Congress needs to open up legal pathways. We haven't done that in decades. For many of these migrants, there is no line for them to get into. There's no right way for them to use except for asylum, which is legal. We should also recognize that our country needs immigrants. I don't know about you all, but every CEO I talk to says we need a labor force. I have had CEOs from different parts of the country tell me, can we have some of those asylum seekers in our community? Because we can't get anybody to go to work. So we need to recognize how advantageous immigration is for America. We also need to modernize our processing and include a federal civilian workforce so that, Judge, you don't have to step in and fill in where the federal government has failed. Most importantly, we can depoliticize this work and work for real solutions. So if we want to end the scourge of fentanyl, I sure wish my Republican colleagues would have voted for the bipartisan infrastructure law, which funds technology at our ports. If you want to help defeat the cartels, fund the president's budget as he applies historic resources to do this. If you want to erode the power of the cartels, advocate to end Title 42. And if you want to secure the border, I sure wish you would have voted for historic funding for the Department of Homeland Security in December. But every member of the Republican Party, every colleague actually on this panel who is a Republican voted against that funding. And in fact, in December, President Biden asked for $5 billion for the Department of Homeland Security. Republicans cut that in half and then voted against it. Judge, in that funding was money for communities like ours, for governments like yours that help partner with us. If the Republicans would have had their way, and if that funding wouldn't have made it to you to help, who or what agency would have been hurt the most?
Oh, my goodness. Just a fact of not having the funding, obviously everybody gets hurt because now NGOs have to step in without any money. Everything gets shifted away from what they need to do. I can tell you FEMA helping us really took that was such an incredible opportunity for us to be able to shelter, to process, to do the things that we wanted to do in a very organized manner.
And when you can't help, what agency has to pick up the burden? What federal law enforcement agency?
Well, the Border Patrol.
That's
Border
right.
Patrol. They feel, that's why we have such a great relationship, because they know that if we weren't doing our job with the community, they would have to have, there's 1,200, they have 1,200 beds available. Sometimes they got as much as 5,500. When we help them, the flow comes through, they're feeling good about it, and we take all that pressure away from the federal government.
Thank you, Judge. My time has expired. I yield back.
Right now. Before we go to our next interlocutor, I guess, do any of you need a 5 or 10 minute break? We do. Okay, so we're going to recess for 10 minutes, or the sound of the gavel. We're in recess.